Hi. Hello. I'm Arthur. The characters of the 40k setting have always been its lifeblood. I think that the setting itself is cool, and I know a lot of you prefer the game to be nothing more than just a game, and to a degree, I do think that that's the most efficient way of going about it. I mean, an uncomfortable truth about 40k, simply put, the lore wouldn't exist without the game, but the game could pretty easily exist without the lore. Look at 10th edition. But regardless, the characters of 40k are such an interesting topic, as some of them are some of the best written characters in fiction, at least in my opinion. You may disagree. But this video is a compilation of 20 Arthur Lord members-only videos I did over the last year, with the theme of the most interesting characters in each of the legions of Space Marines and Order of the Legions, put together in one big video so you can all watch it. Now, I will state that the beginning and ends of these videos are snipped off for the sake of brevity, but also because I want to at least keep them kind of kept secret to people who are not Arthur Lords, so if you want to see the whole thing, then become an Arthur Lord. It would be very much appreciated. But in general, this is just going to be a long-ass video about characters that I think are probably the most interesting and coolest in the setting. It's covering anybody and anything that could be associated with them, so yeah, well, mostly Space Marines, but whatever. Not much else to say other than that, but yeah, before we get into it, let's have a quick word from our sponsor. I don't really play many video games, I'll say that. If I do, it's usually just some uber obscure PlayStation 1 retro horror game where nothing really makes sense, and also it's a dream, but also sometimes it's not. So, it's a testament to Warhammer 40,000 Tacticus that I sank so many damn hours into that game. No joke, I genuinely have an uncomfortable amount of time in this, as it's like the only game I really throw time into in a day, especially when I'm working. It's fast and easy to learn, and it doesn't require a lot of time for you to really throw into it to actually do a good job in it. It's my favorite part about it. So 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there, and maybe a half hour before bed while I'm lying there contemplating my own existential dread. It is so perfect for my schedule. Not just that, but the gameplay isn't mindless. It actually requires a decent amount of thought to play it. So when they approached me to talk about the game again, it was kind of a no-brainer. Clicking my link or scanning the QR code on screen, you can plug the code OCTHELLO for 50 Blackstone and 20 energy, which is always useful, especially if you're trying to rank up your champions so that you can do those elite campaign levels, which, speaking from experience, as I'm currently going through the Mirror Indomitus campaign elite, it's rough. With an amazing collection of unique and fun champions to make a team for, Warhammer 40,000 Tacticus is a game you should definitely pick up, and who knows, you may run into me in the arena at some point. Thanks again to Warhammer 40,000 Tacticus for sponsoring this video, and let's get back into the video proper. A lot of people were asking for characters, chapter masters, sorcerers, librarians, military vets, and so on. But I realized that I want to go back to my roots, cover something I think is just neato. And that thing is semi-obscure characters, and forcing myself to sound like at any moment I have a actually up my sleeve like a blue player in Magic. Regardless of that, I want to talk about Dark Angels today, as Dark Angels are quite a fun thing, I will admit. Dark Angels characters are not really fun at all, as all of them are kind of just boring. Or they are the same dude, copied and pasted over 20 times over and over, which sucks a lot of dick, I will admit. Hell, look up names of characters that aren't the main dudes that you'd find in the chapter, and I can guarantee you're going to find that they reuse the same names over and over and over again. It's really frustrating. So you can kind of figure out the issues when starting the series for this specific legion. I wanted to cover specifically Azrael first, but no, I think I should cover someone I think is also super interesting and important, but I also wanted to keep Azrael just in case I wanted to do an all chapter Masters of each Legion series at some point. So who are we going to be talking about today? Zahariel. Zahariel is an old as sin character who is incredibly important to the story of the Lion, as he is one of the only people in the setting to be confirmed to be able to forest walk, which is an ability that if you read Lion, Son of the Forest, you would know what that is, but we'll get to it a little bit later. As with most things, I kind of want to start where the story starts, give a brief synopsis of Zahariel's life, give you all the context you need, and then go off on an unhinged, chaotic fucking meltdown, but all in due time. So, let's begin, shall we? Well, Zahariel is older than most actually, as he was an originally born on Caliban space marine who had the good fortune of growing up on Caliban just before the Emperor showed up, but just in time for him to be turned into a space marine when the Emperor arrived. The Emperor showed up, and since he was doing the whole golden appearance, I am God but don't actually worship me thing, Zahariel was about like 12 or 13, so he's basically just the perfect age. But even though he was around that kind of middle teen area, he was also one of the most impressive individuals on the planet. He was simply a boy who wanted to join the Order, which was a group of knights on Caliban who banded together under the control of the Lion and his surrogate father, Luther. This order arose as a means to deal with the great beasts, creatures that made it so that the roads of Caliban and the forests themselves were not safe. Now, it's heavily implied that these creatures are just chaos-corrupted animals, as very few are the same and they all have very magical properties to them. But, you know, it's never really confirmed like most things in Games Workshop. Because of their existence, the people of Caliban were forced to live inside the walled-off cities that were basically pockmarking the forest to prevent the beasts from coming in. And even then, for the larger and more dangerous of the beasts, that didn't do much. So the Order wanted to rally all of the knights on this planet to bring all of them to task, making each knight be dedicated to the singular purpose of eradicating the beasts rather than petty politics, the squabbling of men to get more power. They just wanted to make sure that the world was safe before they could get into any political disputes, and this order was headed by Luther and the Lion. The people who revolted against the Order and didn't want to become under their control were swiftly brought under heel and either destroyed or absorbed by force because, well, the Lion. After the majority of the conquests, that is kind of when Zahariel showed up in order to become a part of this movement. See, this was before they had killed off the majority of the beasts, but after they had rallied the majority of the knights. And why, you might ask, would a child of like 9 or 10 years old show up to do this? Because he wanted to be a knight, stand for something bigger, and he showed no fear in front of warp-based threats during his training as well. So he was a very impressive upstart talent, though he also is a latent psyker, I will add. But yeah, the thing that makes him interesting is he was the only other person ever to kill a Calibanite lion, which is one of the big threats on Caliban that eclipse most others. See, Calibanite lions are covered in iron-like scales of shining silver. These scales are actually as tough as a Space Marine's plate at the thickest points, so it's really hard to get any damage on them without unconventional tactics, or unless your name is Lionel Johnson. The only other person who killed them was, of course, the Lion, though Zahariel cheated, as we come to find out, as I mentioned, that he is a psyker, so he used psychic abilities to just kind of stop its heart, which is cheating, but in 40k, that's just kind of the standard affair, I guess. So with all that in mind, Zahariel comes back wounded, but just to kind of rewind a little bit, what led him to the Lion and what was kind of the most important part was he ended up doing the first forest walk that's mentioned in the series. The forest walk is when, regardless of where you're at, you go into a bit of a meditative trance-like state and find yourself walking into a forest. Now, he just thought he walked into a darker part of the Calibanite forest, but it was some mystical, magical, hoo-ha, whatever, that was filled with magical beasts and the Watchers in the dark that compelled him to get to where he needed to go. Now, he ended up in front of this massive Calibanite lion because of that, and I think that that's very interesting, as the Watchers themselves also tried to detect if there was any traces of chaos or chaotic influence on Zahariel, and they failed to find any, and said that he would deal a great blow to chaos someday, which is interesting. He comes out to much fanfare, as he was one of the only people to ever kill a Calibanite lion, which, again, kind of a big deal. And he ended up joining the Dark Angels as a librarian after they found out that he was psychic, and from there it was kind of history. He is considered one of the most generational talents of the Dark Angels of the time, especially for a psyker, and this kind of leads me to the most interesting question here, which is, why is he significant? It's because he's Cypher. I'm staking my claim on that. I have literally no confirmation of this, and I'll look like an idiot if they prove me wrong, but whatever. Zahariel is an ancient Marine. He knows all of the original traditions of the Order of Caliban, which is important, as for the Order, the name Cypher isn't actually a name as much as it is a title. This title is for any individual who knows everything about the Dark Angels traditions and uses that knowledge to pass it down to later generations. And because he's the oldest Marine out there right now, and was originally slated to be the next Cypher before the Emperor absorbed the Order into the Legion, it makes a lot of sense. Also, shout out to that one time that Cypher of the Fallen Angels slipped past the Shadow Keepers of the Custodes, which is theoretically impossible, but it would make a lot of sense if he did it through forest walking, which is very interesting. With Zahariel doing that, Cypher being an incredibly important character in the modern setting for reasons even I don't fully understand, and Cypher also carrying the lion's old broken sword, that just makes sense. So how would this impact the story? I don't know, no clue. But it does bring up the interesting idea that what if Cypher, as Zahariel, ended up meeting with the lion and ended up getting recruited into the Risen? Wouldn't that just be kind of neat? I guess. I don't know. What do you all think? As there is a lot of fun that could happen from it. Or nothing at all when it's revealed besides a, okay, neat. So, you know the routine at this point. There is no 2nd or 11th Legion, so I gotta put something here that subverts your expectations in order to be the funny haha man. My goodness, how silly I am. Please, everyone clap for me. So, who is this fellow we are talking about who has no discernible Legion that I'm going to go on some insane meltdown about to discuss? It's the Ultramarines? It's the Ultramarine successor. Okay. The individual we are talking about today is a man by the name of Amadeus Caius Incarius, from the mysterious but rather classic group known as the Mentors, which I have always found were such a fun and distinct chapter of Marines, but I'll cover them more in depth at some point. The best way that you can understand them is that they're probably one of the first chapters of Space Marines to ever be shown off alongside, say, like the Crimson Fist and the Ultramarines in the original Rogue Trader books. Though they did not get as much lore as any of those other Marines, they're still a pretty iconic chapter. That aside, I'm going to be talking about just Amadeus, as he's a part of the Mentors, and is an odd example of something that outside of the Death Watch doesn't really ever happen. I'll get into what I mean as we break it down, but speaking of, let's break down who he is as a character, like we do with literally everything else on this channel. So starting off, who is he? Well, he is a relatively high-ranking battle brother in the Mentors, which is a successor chapter of allegedly unknown origin that is well known for sending off individual groups of Marines, if not individual Marines, to train, educate, and assess the combat readiness of other chapters of Space Marines as well as Guardsmen regiments. Essentially, his life has been one of strict structure and efficiency, as he has the entire Codex Astartes memorized and drilled into his brain, to the point where he could rattle it off from memory and teach others of its more complex and nuanced teachings. But things changed once he was sent on the most dangerous mission he's ever gone on, to cross the Nachmund Gauntlet from the Imperium Sanctus to the Imperium Nihilus, specifically gunning for a small section of space known as the Ilara's Veil, which is a section of space that is protected by the very historically important grouping of Space Marines known as the Adeptus Valari. The Adeptus Valari consisting of 3 chapters, which are the Emperor's Spears, the Celestial Lions, and the Star Scorpions. Well, technically it's only the Emperor's Spears now, because the Star Scorpions got corrupted by Chaos, the Celestial Lions got fuck-slammed by the Inquisition, and the Emperor's Spears have been left by their lonesome in order to protect the Veil, with the other 2 being pretty much decimated to a man or trying to kill each other. So it kinda sucks to be the Spears right now. Amadeus was sent to make sure that they are upholding the teachings of the Codex as well as
have not gone rogue in their seclusion while in the Imperium Nihilus. Being urged from on high to go check them out, we find out a bit later that he might have been wrapped up in something bigger than just simply assessing the health of a chapter that's very little known. Through a series of unfortunate events, this man ends up commingling with the Emperor's Spears chapter, finding them to be boorish brutes who know nothing of the Codex Astartes, judging them as nothing more than cannibalistic savages, which, this opinion, well, it's not exactly founded without reason, but it did change over the course of combat and fighting alongside them, as he saw the level of brotherhood and tradition that permeated their ranks. At some point throughout his entire excursion with the Emperor's Spears, Amadeus Incarius was captured by a warband of the Pure, which were what ended up happening to the Star Scorpions. And fun fact, this is a bit of a dramatic irony moment, because the Star Scorpions were originally what the Mentors were meant to replace. See, in the order of Space Marines, there's only supposed to be 1,000. Each Space Marine chapter that's created has a number between 1 and 1,000. So, with that in mind, the number that the Star Scorpions were 777. So, once they were destroyed, they ended up getting replaced by, who guessed it, the Mentors, who ended up taking the paint scheme as well as the number 777. So, while being captured by the Pure, he was tortured, and tortured in a way that not many Space Marines can come back from. He had his black carapace ripped out, the neural uplink ports that connect him to his Space Marine power armor burned away and destroyed, and the majority of his body was broken beyond repair. But there is a way to fix it. See, once he was recaptured by the Emperor's Spears, he was given the choice to either go under and commit to something known as the Calgarian Rites, or die. So, Calgarian Rites, to explain, are a bit weird. It's just a fancier way of saying they're going to help him cross the Rubicon Primaris, but the Calgarian Rites are a little different as I understand it, though I could be wrong. The Calgarian Rites are basically resculpting a Space Marine's body, but there's a few caveats. So for one, they're going to need blood and gene seed coding from the person's parent chapter. Not so much directly from the Ultramarines if they were the Ultramarines, but they have to get something from another battle brother who would be able to give them essentially a transfusion. And that's a problem because there are no Mentors on this side of the Imperium Nihilus, which is where we find out that Amadeus Caius Incarius is actually an Ultramarine successor because he was able to take a gene seed infusion from the Emperor's Spears, which kind of proves who the Mentors are as a successor chapter, which is very interesting that no one talks about it. So with this right, he is able to pass the Rubicon Primaris and regenerate a lot of his lost abilities, though the recovery took several months due to him having to basically regrow nerve endings and tissue, as well as getting used to the new body that he had grown, as he had grown 2 to 3 feet taller due to being a Primaris Marine now. With his armor destroyed, he was given a new suit of bright blue Emperor's Spears power armor, and from there he became an honorary member of the Emperor's Spears. They accepted him knowing that he was still a Mentor Legion individual, and he was still Amadeus Caius Incarius, but they trained with him, and Amadeus, for his part, ended up accepting the others as sort of secondary brothers, people that he could fight alongside and feel honor amongst that. Unfortunately, tragedy struck, as the story itself does not end there. Another figure of legend, Ekene Dubaku, the current chapter master of the Celestial Lines, on his way to Terra, as well as under the protection of one Merrick Grimaldus, was going to meet up with the Spears to coordinate a massive offense against the Pure and possibly try to push them back a little bit more, strike an offensive, and so on. Everyone gathered in the same command room. Ekene, Amadeus, the Spears that they had grown attached to, and several of the slaves that Amadeus had brought. The tragedy that struck was, if out of nowhere, a neural shredder was unleashed, which is a weapon that causes the nerve endings on everybody's body to fire at almost max capacity, causing them to feel like they're in intense pain as well as feeling delirious. Now, for most Space Marines, that wouldn't be much of anything, as they can fight through it. worked, but it was just enough to slow them down so that they couldn't prevent the assassination of Akene Dubaku. A black shadow dropped down from the ceiling wielding a phase blade that sliced through the neck of Akene, removing his head rather swiftly before leaving the room. This individual was found out to be one of the slaves of Amadeus, but before he could plead anything or investigate anything, he and his remaining slave were actually, arrested as they're responsible for an assassination of one of the most important figures in this side of the Imperium Nihilus, so that kind of sucks. But thankfully, they didn't stay there for too long, as they were psychically probed by one of the librarians of the Druidic Circle in the Emperor's Spears. With them pretty much cleared of all charges, they separated, and for what it's worth, they ended up taking care of the Calidus assassin. So what actually happened? Well, turns out that Amadeus's life for the last 20 years has been a bit of a lie. He has been essentially groomed by the Inquisition by having a sleeper agent Calidus assassin be seated amongst his ranks as one of his slaves, pretending to be a feeble old man when it's actually a Calidus assassin, where they were going to eventually dispatch this man to go to the Emperor's Spears so that they have a chance at attacking the Celestial Lions once more. And it worked. So it was this big psyop to assassinate someone that was already going down, which just goes to show how absolutely evil the Inquisition can be if you piss off the wrong ones. So they ended up taking care of the Calidus assassin in the most comedic way possible by just dropping a vortex grenade at her feet and having her be torn to pieces by warp demons. After that, Amadeus, Caius, and Carius decided to fully incorporate into the Spears, deciding to take up a name in their language that would better suit who he wanted to be. See, they would make fun of him throughout the book for being a fake scorpion, someone who wanted to pretend to be like something he was. So, in sort of a sense of irony, realizing that they have a deep-seated tradition of humor, and gallows humor rather, he learned that the best name he wanted to take was Vadan. Vadan translates to the false scorpion, as a reference to how the Mentor stole the identity of the Star Scorpions and inherited their position. I think it's pretty cute myself. In the end, we don't truly know what happened to Vadan. As his story ends about 20 to 50 years, it's kind of vague, after the book where he's in ends. And it ends with him talking to that same slave that survived and ended up killing the Calidus assassin with the vortex grenade. And it's just on the eve of a massive battle where the Pure are beginning to invade Nemeton, which is the home planet of the Emperor's Spears, to which Vadan is preparing. I really like this character's story. I think, even though he's an Ultramarine successor, I think putting him in the second Legion category here is especially appropriate, as he is such a unique character study, as I don't think I've ever heard of a character literally being surgically transformed and transferred into a new chapter. The only time I've ever heard of something similar was that one black dragon who ended up serving in the Salamander Scout Company for a little while. But even then, I'm pretty sure it was temporary, though I could be wrong. Let's talk about the other loyalist Emperor's children that no one really talks about as much, shall we? I know people tend to yap about Rylanor, the Ancient of Rites, and his final middle finger to Fulgrim, the snake, but I think it's very interesting that not as many people talk about a guy who canonically has the most friends in the setting and is also just as impressive as Rylanor. This man is so cool that for someone who, spoiler alert, dies within the first 5 books of the Horus Heresy, he still has a miniature for the Horus Heresy game, which is really cool. Of course, we today are talking about the one, the only, the Saulist of Tarvitz, Tarvitz. Tarvitz is one of the more interesting members of the Emperor's children, as he was basically someone who sought perfection like his brothers, but through more philosophical and purposeful means than the others. He didn't want superfluous perfection. He wanted to be the best from his perspective, literally deciding that he wanted to dedicate his entire being to getting the job done that the Emperor wanted of him as best he could, and dedicate himself to that specific task. He is dedicated, loyal, and nice to a fault, which is why Lucius, yes, that one, who was originally his friend, started to fucking hate him. Holy shit, Lucius actually hates Saul Tarvitz because Saul is everything he is not. Stoic versus impassioned psycho whatever. I know I'm diving into it a bit hard and fast here, but let's dial it back a bit and discuss just who exactly is Saul Tarvitz. In simplest terms, to most people who have ever met him, they see him as simply a basic line officer who is necessary for other people to surpass him on their way to being higher ranking individuals. He's a great warrior, but nothing too stupendous, or at least you'd think. He's the captain of the 10th Company in the Emperor's Children during the Great Crusade, and is in fact as close to non-ostentatious as an Emperor's Children member can get, which is still covered in gold filigreed purple armor, but you know, it is what it is. You can't expect much from the Emperor's Children. It's like Uno coming with your Xbox. It just always comes with the package, right? Regardless, Saul Tarvitz was the opposite of most of his brothers, where he actually didn't enjoy showing off that much. Though, much as he has in common with the rest of his legion, he still sought out perfection just in a very different way, a way under the skin. Basically, unlike every other Marine in the Emperor's Children, Saul Tarvitz wasn't a little insecure bitch about everything. Bro literally just wants to do something that matters to himself, not to others. He cares about what the Emperor has to say, his Primarch has to say, and then himself. In that order, and everything after that, not really important. He kind of just doesn't let it sink in like water off a duck's ass. It just doesn't work. Though, don't let that lead you to think he's arrogant. Far from it. He's a very humble man, actually. Especially for someone of the Emperor's Children. He is practical while also being super skilled at basically almost all forms of combat. I've been playing a lot of the Horus Heresy tabletop recently with a good friend, and I found out that Saul had a model. Saul's model actually goes super hard, but the interesting part is his melee weapon. This massive hunk of metal is not actually a power sword like you would think. It's what is referred to as a charnable weapon, a non-powered sword that is very much a master-crafted weapon that is significantly more deadly in the right hand than a power weapon. See, it doesn't have the power field, so it can't slice through armor. But when it comes to going through soft seals, it is almost perfect for that. When it finds a singular weakness, it can slice through it as if it weren't there. That's just how fine the edge was on it. Though most people of the Emperor's Children use charnable sabers and perhaps charnable spears, as they are graceful weapons, Saul uses a charnable broadsword, which is thicker and heavier as a weapon, and it really goes to show a lot about his character as a whole. He himself is a blunt but efficient tool, you know, the perfect example of the phrase, when you're a hammer, all things are nails. He concerns himself with his purpose above all else, and you know what? It's one of the most admirable parts about Saul. He's also a brilliant tactician, but that's for a little later, as we'll get into why. I mentioned earlier that he makes friends pretty easily, and he does, because while fighting evil murder bugs on Planet Murder, he made friends with Tarek Torgadon, one of the more important members of the Luna Wolves at the time, as well as becoming the honor brother with the one, the only, Nathaniel, all you need is kill Garrow. And I mean, they were best goddamn friends. Having a literal engraving of the Aquila on their gauntlets to match each other to show that they owe each other a debt of honor. It's genuinely one of the more heartwarming interactions to see Saul and Garrow interact every now and then on the few scant pages we get to see. They were actually so close that when Saul found out about Fulgrim's treachery and was going down to Istvan III in order to warn his Marines, he was being chased after by a bunch of Space Marine manned fighter jets that were trying to gun him down. He contacted the only man he knew would trust him, which was Nathaniel Garrow. Saul, pleading his case, basically convinced Garrow to kind of just throw caution to the wind and blow a bunch of jets out of the sky as if they weren't Space Marine planes, as from Garrow's perspective, this is one of the biggest acts of treachery that could possibly happen, Space Marine on Space Marine combat. But he trusted his friend's words so much that he did not really hesitate that much, which it's super sweet to see these kinds of relationships shown through Space Marines. With all that in mind, we get to the final most important part of Saul Tarvet's life, which is what he did on Istvan III during the atrocity that took place there. For those who don't know, the Istvan III atrocity is basically when the traitor forces made their first play by deploying the remnants of their troops that were more loyal to the Imperium than they were to their own legion, and they were planning on, once they were down there, to virus bomb the ever-living shit out of the planet to get rid of those forces so that they had kind of a clarity of purpose. Unfortunately, due to Saul's warning, many of the loyalist World Eaters, Emperor's Children, Death Guard, and even some Sons of Horus were able to survive the bombardment by getting underground quick enough. And due to Angron and a bunch of World Eaters that were part of the traitor side being a bit impatient and wanting to jump down and get into a melee, they couldn't bombard the planet again. Instead, because of that, adjusting their plan to try and wear them down and crush their morale, as it were, as a bit of an example as to why you shouldn't trifle with the War Master. So, thus came on the weeks and months of bloody, grindy warfare, where the forces of the traitors had to bleed for every inch they took. This was all because Saul Tarvitz was a genius tactician, and dedicated to his job of being a genuinely fantastic captain. He had help from other captains that were there, and honestly, I don't think it was that much considering how good of a tactician he was. He probably would have done even more than just bleed them out for every inch they took if it wasn't for Lucius and his turncoat backstabbing fat ass having ways causing him to massacre the majority of the loyalist elements in their main encampment. Basically, Lucius was promised that he could rejoin the traitor side if he massacred the majority of the injured, the sick, the dying from all the fighting that had been going on, and also massacre the various guards that were guarding the main base of operations so that Eidolon and the rest of the forces can bombard the living shit out of that place and the rest of his misbegotten freaks could invade. That being said, what happens next is kind of genuinely sad. They scare off Lucius as it was him versus Saul, which is a relatively even matchup, though Lucius has been practicing, so he was kind of overpowering Saul. And then another couple Marines showed up to just gun down Lucius, but he managed to scamper away. And what happens next is that their base of operations was basically destroyed, and that's when the next level of bombardment showed up. And with the clearing rubble kind of peeling away, Saul looks off in the distance to see that the Titan Legios that were there on the side of the traitor forces were deployed, and they were basically just going to annihilate and destroy every last one of the loyalist remnants that were on that planet. There was this genuinely beautiful moment where a bunch of disillusioned Emperor's children, who were recognizing they were basically just about to die, asked Saul for some very basic wisdom. They just simply asked, did we hurt them? Was this all worth anything? Or was it all just a fool's errand stretched out over a small campaign? And Saul, in his own internal monologue, he didn't know. And I think that shows a very thoughtful character, as he said yes, and he wanted to reassure them before their deaths, but I think that these Emperor's children kind of knew that he didn't know himself. But fun fact, he was right. With him stalling out the traitor forces on Istvan III for so long, it allowed a lot of the Imperials to gain a foothold in other operations, allowing the Dark Angels a little bit of breathing room so they weren't dealing with massive waves of Sons of Horus that came to reclaim a bunch of different forge moons that they were on, as well as allowing Nathaniel Garrow to show up and warn the Imperial Fists that there were traitors coming. And because of that, we were able to mount a massive offensive. And I say we as in, the loyalist side, because I'm not a traitor. What do I look like to you? A traitor? I'm not a traitor. God, I'm a fucking idiot. Unfortunately, Saul did not survive, but he is still one of the more interesting and fun characters to discuss with these matters, and I think he's really cool on a personal level. Also, again, his model is hard. So what do you all think of Saul Tarvitz? When covering a fun Iron Wars character, you tend to find a lot of options. There is a lot of stuff that people tend to enjoy about them and their entire legion. I personally love that each of them are always just a bit too serious all the time. They can never take a joke, and because of that, they're always just a bit too dramatic. There were a few characters I wanted to cover, but I find the ones that I gravitate to the most are usually a bit too obscure and they don't have much to talk about. Like, I just fell in love recently with a Vindicator operator in the modern day who ascended to Demon Princehood through sheer effort of will, but he's in like one book to my knowledge. So before I get too far off track, the topic of today is the one, the only, thank fuck, Hansu. See, Hansu is kind of an odd monstrosity. He is, in fact, one of the worst, if not the worst, character in 40k in terms of morality. And he also, in fact, constantly finds new bars to set on the Pain Olympics of, oh no, I now have to read this in order to make a video about its lore in 40k content creation. So let's get a bit specific with Hansu. I may touch upon him a bit more later, and I think I probably will and make a longer video, but this is going to be a bit of a brief overview as to who he is, understanding his character, and a few small tidbits along the way as to understand him, because a lot of people tend to focus in on the meme aspects of what he represents rather than who he is as a character. Because for those of you who don't know, Hansu was the one responsible for the creation of the Demunculaba. Since I trust you've all liked the video, and I trust you are already subscribed, as it would be kind of weird for you to be a channel member without being subscribed, I'll just hop right into the video, and let's get into it. Hansu had not the greatest of starts. See, from my understanding, the gene seed of the Iron Warriors, the thing that creates them, is pretty stable, or rather it was, as their main planet, the one they stay on, Medrengard, is, for lack of a better word, a chaos corrupted shithole world in the middle of the Eye of Terror, which causes rampant mutation and constant corruption. This has caused a lot of the gene seed reserves, as well as the gene seed inside the bodies of each space marine for the Iron Warriors, to basically have been either corrupted to the point of unusability, or if they implant it into a new space marine, they mutate to the point where they're not even a space marine, they're probably something more akin to like a chaos spawn. So there were many different raids launched across the universe, which is very commonplace for many different factions to do, where they will essentially try and find new gene seed for their specific faction, going from planets with loyalist marines taking their gene seed and then using it to swell their specific ranks. But the Iron Warriors are a bit of a proud faction, so instead of using just the raw gene seed they stole from a stable gene seed bank, they actually instead used the gene seed and its stable properties to essentially make their existing gene seed more stable. So thus, the birth of the hybrid gene seeds, Iron Warriors, kind of happened. That, unfortunately, is where we find Hansu. Hansu was born from a hybrid of Imperial Fists and Iron Warriors gene seed, which kind of gives him a bit of a slow start, because people kind of hate the Imperial Fists, especially in the Iron Warriors, especially in the warband that he's in. You might think that it also would kind of lead him to have a bit more of a balanced temperament, as though both legions tend to be a bit more on the cynical side of things and a bit more stoic. They both tend to be opposite sides of the same coin, with the Iron Warriors being more aggressive in their tactics and creatively terrifying, while the Imperial Fists tend to rely more on what's worked in the past and the tried and true tactics that they have established. So balancing off an Iron Warrior would kind of come naturally, but no. It only just made it so that Hansu had more to prove, as everybody around him kind of hated him, so he decided to hate them even more, which is the most Iron Warriors thing you could ever possibly do. He is probably the meanest, the nastiest, and the cruelest of the Iron Warriors, and I know that's saying something. To the point where when he was rising in the ranks, the many people that surrounded him would be very familiar with his brand of cruelty, but they would still be surprised at its depth and girth. He rose pretty quickly through the ranks, becoming a warsmith through some weird shenanigans that popped up. Essentially, the Chaos Lord / warsmith who was running his current warband ended up ascending to demonhood, and as one final fuck you to his warband, he appointed the half-breed to be the new warsmith, which I think is only partly a joke, because, I mean, it's Iron Warriors. They're gonna fuck with each other as much as possible. But also, Hanzo is just surprisingly competent at most things that he gets done. Because as he took over that warband, he ended up enacting changes that would make them one of the most feared Iron Warriors sub-factions in the entirety of the setting. For lack of a better way of putting it, think the poster children of the Iron Warriors right now. See, he ended up gathering such arcane relics that it was almost impossible for him to not be noticed. Least of all on him, he himself is just ludicrously powerful, blessed by chaos, though not necessarily incredibly mutated, as one of his arms is removed, likely due to some kind of war injury, replaced from the elbow down with this augmetic, this cybernetic arm that was given to him by the Dark Mechanicum, which he has struck an alliance with, having a small emplacement of the Dark Mechanicum known as the Savage Morticians in his home base, which is Karlan Gol. Then you have a chaos corrupted and blessed axe that I did never really say what it does, but I'm assuming it just kills you more. Then he managed to trap this entity known as the Heart of Blood, which is a massive Khorne demon that is considered one of the most important in Khorne's favor. This demon they drug with the blood of psychers and have it pinned with magic chains in the base of Karlan Gol, and because he is being drugged with the blood of psychers, he emits this aura that causes all psychic anythings that happen in Karlan Gol to just not work. So he basically has given himself that advantage. And there's also the fact that he has a Khorne demon that if he ever wanted to just go nuclear, he could just let that sucker go and then boom, the entire base gets destroyed. Regardless, he has all of these good things working for him and a bunch of individuals that work alongside him that are just as hateful and resentful as him. Like, he had this demon-possessed Chaos Marine known as Onyx. Onyx isn't actually his name, it's actually a joke that was the only part of his name that he could pronounce. So Onyx had more in common with a Galvor back than he did with a normal possessed, as he was able to form coherent thoughts and was able to transition between the possessed Marine as well as the demon that was inside with relative ease. They were a very easy to work with individual. But all of that kind of came crashing down one day. Because if you follow the Uriel Ventress series, Uriel Ventress gets put on a vengeance quest to kill the Heart of Blood at the base of Karlan Gol, which he ends up succeeding at after rallying a bunch of random Marines. I'm not going to talk about it, but yeah, the Demunculaba video, if you want to know a little bit more about what happens, and I might cover more of Uriel Ventress' story later, but they ended up basically just showing up at the worst possible time for Hanzo, because at the time there were a bunch of other Iron Warrior warsmiths who were trying to murder Hanzo and steal the gene seed reserves that Hanzo had recently acquired. This war was going on while Uriel Ventress and company were sabotaging his facility. It led to a bunch of new developments. Onyx died, the Heart of Blood was released, and bad things happened there. Hanzo ended up getting a new arm because Pausanias, Uriel Ventress' best friend, had an arm made of necrodermis that was taken from a prior adventure. This arm could resculpt itself and was basically indestructible. No matter how many times you broke it, it would reform. So Hanzo had that removed, grafted onto his own arm, which, cool, now he has a necrodermis arm, which, now that I think about it, kind of gives him a tinge of 3 different legions all at once, which is Imperial Fists, Iron Warriors, and the Iron Hands, because he has the Iron Hand that Ferrus Manus had. But I'm getting off track. So, through a sheer stroke of luck and surviving a bolt shell to the back of the head, Hanzo survives and is now still one of the biggest threats in the universe. Like, I would rather encounter any of the other major traitor factions before I would encounter Hanzo's warband. As, Emperor's Children is still probably up there, because I don't think I could handle that. You know what? I'll say top 5. Hanzo, definitely top 5 legions that I would not want to mess with. But regardless, Hanzo is kicking ass, taking names, and where does that leave us with him as a character? I think the biggest thing that I want to point out that I've noticed in the few writings that I've read about him, he's a very insecure individual, and I don't think I needed to point that out. You could probably piece that together with how his backstory is kind of read to you. Hanzo is an insecure individual because he's insecure about his birthplace, where he came from, who he is, the fact that he's a part Imperial Fists. Now, because he's part Imperial Fist, it drives him to be better, to, be worse in this situation, to be honest, where he is trying his best to outdo every single person around him to prove that he's not some mutt, some mongrel that they drug up and was picked to be number one in this position on a joke. And this leads him to do levels of cruelty that I don't think many other legions can say they've gotten even close to. And it's because of this insecurity that I think he's a very interesting character, because it leaks through everything he does, where he constantly feels like he has to one-up everyone. But yeah, that's Hanzu. Am I going to cover him again later? Probably. I do have a lot more I want to say about him, but I need to read more so I can be better learned about him. But this is a brief overview about who he is as a character. White Scars are such a fun legion. When picking an option for most legions, you do have a good swath of choices in order to make for, like, characters, but with the White Scars, the majority of the characters that are written about are actually all pretty fun to talk about. So I was a bit spoiled for choice in that sense, but I decided to pick something a little bit weird. So we're going to squeeze the sweet, sweet lore juice out of this, and we're going to be talking about Hebo Khan. For those who haven't read the Horus Heresy series, his name might not be too familiar, but Hebo Khan is one of the most interesting members of the White Scars, as he was one of the only ones to actually turn traitor during the Horus Heresy. But I think him, plus a few others in the White Scars, are part of a small group of individuals who turned traitor initially, but eventually actually became loyalists again, and were actually considered quite respected. There are a lot of caveats to this, but it has a lot to do with the warrior lodges. As there isn't too much to know about for Hebo Khan, I do think that I want to spend a little time explaining those. So the warrior lodges are kind of wacky, but basically there was a planet called Davin. Davin is incredibly significant, as that was where the first initial corruption of Horus happened, but it's also known for having these warrior lodges where individuals of every rank were allowed to speak to each other as if they were all of the same rank. So generals could speak to rookies and they would be seen with the same level of respect. Now, Erebus, you know, that guy, was actually someone who worked to incorporate these ideas throughout the various legions to sow chaos and dissidents throughout the various more loyal legions to the Emperor. It actually worked pretty well. And it's not too hard to see why, because, well, with legions like the Imperial Fists or Iron Warriors, or really any legion that has a crippling allergy to having fun or being relaxed, the idea of being happy without any conditions on top of it was kind of a big hit with them. But for legions that actually had a strong bond of brotherhood, the legions were kind of fun, but they were already there, like the bonds of brotherhood were already established and things like that. So things like the Space Wolves and the White Scars, they did have warrior lodges and they did kind of work a little bit well, but it didn't cause them to have the fervor that they would for legions that didn't have that already. The lodges themselves would have complicated rituals. You would need a membership coin, usually with a snake on it, and also with the symbol of the legion. Each one of these lodges had their own rituals and ideals based on the individual ideals of the legion itself. They had cute little secret code words that they would use outside of the lodges, like for the Luna Wolves, and for most of the legions, if I'm recalling correctly, if you were trying to speak about something that was involving the lodges outside of a lodge meeting, all you could say in response was, "I can't say," which is why my neurons get activated when I'm reading a modern day 40k book and a traitor marine says "I can't say" when talking about the legion shit. It's kind of cute. Regardless, what was going on in the White Scars as the warrior lodge shit is a bit of a long story, but the people spearheading this were a few Terran-born marines who were a mixture of jealous of other legions like the Luna Wolves, and people who just wanted the Great Khan to side with Horus during the upcoming heresy. Hebo was one of these individuals who was in charge of a large swath of troops. See, his, last name was Khan, which means he was a leader of one of the Brotherhoods, which is usually about 100 to 1,000 Marines if I'm remembering correctly. Hebo sided with a few others, Torgan Khan and Hasek Noyan Khan. Now, Noyan Khan is basically a chapter master equivalent. So for context, Hasek Noyan Khan was the guy who was more or less in charge of the minor rebellion in the White Scars. And I say minor as the Great Khan showed up to talk to his men and get some fucking sense into them. But they were, pretty unreasonable considering what was going on with Horus and his band of reprobates. Long story short, Hasek made the bad decision of drawing a weapon on a Primarch, which has a track record ranging from, well, that went surprisingly well, I'm not actually dead, to, instantly dead. In this case, it was closer to the second one than the first one. Though it's not confirmed that Hasek truly died during this fight or in the trials afterwards, but allegedly he was dead before the Horus Heresy got to the Siege of Terra. But Hebo, being in the room and siding with Hasek, decided instead of fighting to surrender and be brought into the custody of the Great Khan and the loyalist White Scars. See, the White Scars did it a bit different. Instead of throwing a full-on chimp out and killing everybody who even could be considered a traitor, they actually gave them a chance to redeem themselves if the Khan thought it was necessary. And the Terran-born Hebo Khan was a part of a unit dedicated to specifically that, redeeming himself for his perceived betrayal. And what was Hebo Khan's specialty? He was a living blender, and he takes his fucking job seriously. He has painted his face in the manner of a grinning skull, a death mask to show you just exactly what the fuck is in store for you if you face him, which apparently isn't even an understatement. His main weapon of choice was a custom power sword by the name of the Breath of the Storm, which is cool as shit. And to say this man is basically a Beyblade with legs is kind of an understatement. Like I said, man took his job seriously. He actually has had some major impacts on the lore, even if you might not have heard of him. But one of my favorites is he actually went toe-to-toe with Little Horus Axiomand. See, Little Horus is one of the Mornival, the 4 space marines in charge of giving advice to Horus Lupercal. For context even further, Abaddon, that one, was one of the Mornival. So Horus Axiomand was one of these individuals. He went and fought Hebo Khan after fighting one of Hebo Khan's friends. See, Hebo lost his sword and ended up picking up his friend's sword, which was a 2-handed power Zweihander, which is cool, and in a pretty easy fashion beat the shit out of Little Horus. It was very violent, as you could probably tell by this picture here, but to explain this, Hebo Khan, with one swift slice, actually cut into the faceplate of Horus Axiomand and sliced the front half face of his helmet off. Now, he missed because he was aiming to bifurcate the man from the head down, but he hit just close enough to slice off the majority of his face, which if you look at Axiomand's model right now, he actually has his face reattached. A little bad looking, but it was, and that's kind of interesting to find out where those scars came from. Which also, by the way, Hebo Khan has his own model, and it's beautiful, though I would never be able to paint that face paint. I'm not good enough for that. Other than this, we don't really know what happened to him. We don't know if he died during the Siege of Terra or if he really was a major participant in it. As it stands, he is just such a cool character and deserves a bit more than just, oh, and then he did the cool thing. Though there are a lot of one-offs of the Horus Heresy like that. Hebo seems a bit special. Also, he deserves more lore because he has a model, and there's a lot more characters that have more writing than him that don't have a model. Like, Barabbas Dantioch doesn't have a model, and he's a fan favorite. So I think Hebo Khan deserves more lore. But as it stands, that's about all we know. I do like the idea of the traitor elements of the Loyalist Legions. I think they are an often overlooked part of the Horus Heresy, as the more writing we get, the more that we know. As the dial of time grinds ever onward, we know more and more about the Horus Heresy, and it changes our perspective. You might call it a retcon, but I think that it adds a little bit more depth to things. I think the elements that it adds are super interesting. Like, prior to the current edition of the Horus Heresy game, it was actually stated that the Iron Warriors never wore Mark 6 power armor. They always wore Mark 2, Mark 3, and very rarely Mark 4. But, furthermore, we learn that, no, at the end dates of the Horus Heresy, it's actually explained that, well, armor was armor. If you could find it, you could use it. So some Marines did use it. And another thing is that there was actually a lot more traitor elements in every legion than you'd expect. One of my favorite rules is that if you get the rulebook for the Loyalist Space Marines, there is ways to play them as traitors. Good examples with the Ultramarines. There's actually a warlord trait you can pick called Pride's Dark Power. It's only for traitor Ultramarines, and it's really fucking cool. It literally makes your strength characteristic equal to your leadership characteristic just for the turn, which is funny, and it's very fluffy and it's very flavorful. But if we go to the White Scars, we actually find that there is a similar trait there, and it plays into something that I said earlier, which is that some White Scars elements were jealous of the Sons of Horus and the Luna Wolves. So with this specific traitor warlord trait for the White Scars, you gain benefits of working alongside the Sons of Horus, which, that's super fluffy. Seems pretty bad, actually. Like, it seems like you're going to have to do a lot of hoops to get this one to work just for a minor buff, but like, It's cool. I think it's really cool. It's the little touches like that that I think make the Horus Heresy as a setting and as a game so fun, which is why I wanted to make this little piece about Hebo Khan. We're covering Space Wolves today, my ghouls, and with that in mind, I'm going to have to admit, I just don't really give much of a shit about Space Wolf characters outside of like a certified wide-load Hager the Mountain, and I don't really want to cover him specifically just yet as I'm kind of elbow deep in the Ragnar Blackmane series, so I kind of want to finish that before I even cover him. So, what do we do now? What are we going to cover? The Horus Heresy stuff? I am so behind on my readings on that, so no. Originally, I did want to cover Ragnar Blackmane in this specific spot, as he is truly the Wolf of Space, but I felt it was time to cover a bit of a spicy meme instead of actually treating the Space Wolves with any fucking dignity. Yeah, if you read the title, you know exactly what we are covering. The actual fucking Wolves of Fenris. The Fenrisian Wolves. Which is weird because, well, for being the mascot animal of the Space Wolves, you'd think the Fenrisian Wolves would be a bit more prominent in the lore. And I don't mean that from, like, a top-down perspective, because looking at Space Wolves lore, every chance they get, they ride on wolves, they show off wolves. I mean, you'd think that every time a Space Wolf was brought up, there'd be an accompanying Fenrisian wolf, but no, apparently not. This isn't really making sense. So what I mean is, with the Blood Angels, their name comes from Sanguinius, who is the Angel of Blood. He is someone who sacrificed himself for his entire faction, and so every single goddamn chance the Blood Angels are brought up in any context of writing, well, you can guarantee that Sanguinius is going to be mentioned in the slightest. They don't really do that with the Space Wolves, whom have kind of been given a lot of shit for being the wolfiest wolves that ever wolfed. Fenrisian wolves are kind of an afterthought, especially on the tabletop, and they are hardly mentioned in lore unless specifically the book takes place on Fenris, which of course is bullshit, but there is actually a lot of other bullshit things about Fenrisian wolves, which is why I thought I'd just yell about them a bit, because in all honesty, they are a smidge important, and I honestly think they're kind of cool. So what even is a Fenrisian wolf? Well, if you couldn't tell by the name, it's a wolf found on Fenris. Props, GW, you did it again. What next, you gonna rename the Jokero to Space Orangutans? Kind of for it, honestly. Simplicity. Regardless, the wolves are found exclusively on Fenris, and anatomically speaking, they have more in common with if you crossed a bear with a horse than an actual wolf. Sometimes the larger variants of the species are described as such anyway. See, with Fenris, you have no real major safe land masses, but there is a few spots. The world itself is constantly consumed by various different weather phenomena, so storms, tsunamis, earthquakes, just natural disasters constantly. And most lowland islands on the planet, especially the lower lying archipelagos, are more or less covered in either storms, completely drowned out by high tides, or covered in magma from erupting volcanoes that are making new islands actively. And for that specific reason, the highlands of Fenris are where most animals live, and it's technically a safer spot. And I mean safer only for the purpose of natural disasters, because you have to contend with a lot of other horrible shit that exists on these highlands. What kind of horrible shit do you actually have to deal with? Shit that would be on a random encounter list on a D&D game? Because you have ice trolls, bears the size of tanks, and of course, the Fenrisian wolves, who think you are a tasty snack. Not a meal, I mind you. These dudes are big, but a snack nonetheless. As this is the only stable landmass, all living creatures not in the sea are more or less found on these higher land areas, especially space wolves, like the recruitment zones for the space wolves are here, as well as the Fang, which is the major fortress monastery for the space wolves. The most dangerous of the Fenrisian wolves tend to stalk pretty close to the Fang, as it is on the highest part of the planet itself, and that is both a good thing and a bad thing, and we'll kind of touch upon that later. But let's get into the species itself, the anatomical stuff about the Fenrisian wolves that kind of makes them a bit of an interesting creature to discuss. The creature itself does bear a striking resemblance to your standard canine wolf that would be found in our world. They are significantly larger, but from how they're described, they have thicker musculature around their necks and jaws, as well as a broader head. Likely similar to that of, say, like like a spotted hyena or like a traditional hyena that have like very thick muscular necks. Because if you look at this bad boy is like 60% neck. And the reason for that is because their jaws have the bite force to crush bones, as it's a very useful thing for scavengers to have when they don't have to give up eating once there's nothing but bones left. For Fenrisian wolves, though, the rest of their body is kind of proportionally large to accommodate it, though the muscles around their jaws and neck are especially developed. There are several different variants of the Fenrisian wolves, but the main one is the common Fenrisian wolf, found on the majority of the highland areas. It travels in packs. It's standard wolf tactics. Since the Fenrisian wolves were kind of written about before we found out that the whole alpha, beta, whatever bullshit was fake, they travel in packs with an alpha at the head. Now, the alpha wolf is usually bigger and stronger than the rest of the pack, and yeah. The standard common Fenrisian wolf is thick-furred, comes in a variety of colors, though think your standard timber wolf in coloration. That's kind of what they look like. Above that, we have the black-maned wolf, which is kind of a simplistic name, but when you realize how simple we name things in real life, you kind of realize it's on par. Now, the reason why it's called a black-maned wolf is it's a very weirdly different species of Fenrisian wolf, with its muzzle being broader, its bite force being higher, and its level of aggression being significantly higher. It's also definitely a lot more territorial, willingly attacking anything that gets within its perceived territory. Think cassowary, but like a wolf. These individuals are very much mythologized, as Morkai, the two-headed black wolf, was kind of this big mythological figure on Fenris. I hear estimates online, I don't remember where I heard this, that the bite PSI of a standard Fenrisian wolf is like 12,000 PSI, which is insane, and I have no idea where I heard that, and I highly doubt that, as that is significantly higher than the bite force of a Jaws of Life unit used to rip open cars. If that's true, cool. If not, that makes more sense. But yes, the black-maned wolves of Fenris are some of the most dangerous ones to find, but they aren't the most dangerous variant of the Fenrisian wolf that we know about. See, there's a bunch of different wolves that we don't know about, but the ones that we do know about, and the ones that are the most dangerous of the bunch, are the thunder wolves. Thunder wolves, much like the black-maned wolf in comparison to the standard Fenrisian wolf, are significantly larger than both. Think if you're comparing a standard show horse to a Clydesdale. There is just a uniquely large amount of mass on these entities that make them almost easily confused for a bear-like creature rather than a wolf. And that's actually kind of what they're usually compared to. Their bulk is in a lot of muscle, and it makes them look a lot more broad, a lot more wide set. Another interesting fact about these individuals is that the thunderwolves tend to actually have fur that is thicker and somehow more dense than traditional fur. It's often described as being as dense as steel, which is kind of cool. In especially 40k, there's a lot of instances of, oh, its skin is as thick as steel, but I really like the idea that this thing just has steel wool across its body. The Thunderwolf is actually especially aggressive. They don't travel in packs. They actually are a lone hunter-style wolf that will attack other Thunderwolves on sight, especially if they look smaller, and they'll attack anything else and kill it pretty easily. See, with Fenrisian wolves and black-maned wolves, they tend to fight similar like most mammalian life, where they will run you down, wait for you to run out of breath, and then they'll just maul you as a pack. But the Thunderwolf, due to its level of just pure power and its speed, it runs them down instantly, and it's described that it goes specifically for the neck to rip off their head to kill them instantly, which is particularly aggressive. The Thunderwolf is especially known for being a very important prize to the Space Wolves, as if you are able to befriend and earn the trust of a Thunderwolf, you officially are one of the top % of Space Wolves, and veterans of these ranks that have a Thunderwolf enter what is known as the Thunderwolf Cavalry, which is, yes, Space Wolves with melee weapons that ride on top of Thunderwolves. That's fucking awesome. So, with all that in mind, I think that the Fenrisian Wolves are awesome. I think they're really cool. I think that even though I shit on the Space Wolves quite a lot, I think that the Fenrisian Wolves of the Space Wolves are such a unique feature for them. Like the idea that a Thunderwolf can hold up a fully clad Space Marine in full power armor, and they just run in screaming like berserkers. You tell me that's not the coolest, but also the scariest thing you've ever heard of. Fighting against space wolves is such an understated intimidation tactic that honestly, off the rip, I'd probably be as scared of them as I would be of Night Lords, just on base alone. And I know that's a big statement, but I want you to think that you are holding up the line, you're getting ready to fight, you're working for the traitors, and you're doing a good job, like you're one of the best, and then suddenly galloping in the distance, you see wolves the size of small vans being ridden upon by about 9,000 pounds of armor, muscular man, wolf DNA, and an axe that has your name on it. Behind them, you have werewolves with great hammers charging you that are somehow moving faster than the Thunderwolf cavalry. Then behind them, you have a berserk werewolf whom is just a floating head and a brainstem inside of a murder robot that is charging at you somehow on all fours, even though it cannot bend that way. I honestly would just pack it in. I'd immediately repent my sins and pray to whatever god that isn't chaos. I think that's pretty fun. I know this is a bit of a shorter video, but I really like the Thunderwolves, the Fenrisian wolves, the Black Mane wolves. I kind of like the wolf aesthetic, and I just wanted to talk about how cool I think they are. I will get back to talking about characters in the next video. I just wanted to talk about Fenrisian wolves. Chapter Masters, probably one of the most beloved things about the whole setting. Prior to the whole Primarchs returning every few years thing, there was this kind of aura a Chapter Master had for a tabletop game. Like, he was the top guy. There was no one better than him in the chapter, and then you threw a named Chapter Master out there, and it just had a certain power to it. I remember when I was really into playing just generic Space Marines. I had a one-on-one fight with a friend of mine in 9th edition, where I was playing Minotaurs with Asterion Moloch, and he was playing Grey Knights with Kaldor Drago. The fight was legendary, and totally didn't have Moloch being evaporated by a magic missile attack, but regardless, Chapter Masters are just pretty cool. Kayvon Shrike and the Raven Guard, Tyberos the Red Wake of the Carcharodons, Pedro fucking Cantor of the Crimson Fists. The list goes on, as each of these individuals holds a lot of import in the setting today. Hell, Marneus Calgar is one of the most well-written of the bunch. And I'd say, in terms of just power scaling, if you were to put him against, like, say, Rabute Gilliman, it wouldn't be as one-sided as you'd expect. I mean, he'd still lose with a 100% chance, but, you know, it'd still be a good fight anyway. I'm getting off track here. So today I want to touch on one of the most important chapters, the Imperial Fists. Literally the backbone of the fight against the traitor forces in the Horus Heresy, probably the last line of defense against the enemies of Terra, and they are considered likely one of the best chapters of Marines out there. Think about it, the Imperial Fists are often held in the same regard as the Ultramarines in terms of importance. So the Chapter Master must be at least equal in terms of importance and knowledge to that of, say, Marneus Calgar, right? Okay, so his name is Gregor Dessian, and he has nothing known about him. Well, okay, so I have one simple question. What? You have one of the greatest chapters of Space Marines, one of the first founding dudes, who is considered the backbone of the Imperium. No shade to the Salamanders, but they kind of tend to their own business. I'm talking the defense of Terra, the War of the Beast. These guys are kind of important, and I know that they lost literally every single Marine aside from one dude during the War of the Beast, but like, come on, you had to have at least a little more than just he was once a part of the 7th Company and was on a penance crusade. When he returned, the old Chapter Master was dead, so now old Greg is here and is now the new one. Which is fucking lunacy. Could you imagine if Marneus Calgar was killed by some massive demon, and the guy who replaced him was some dude by the name of Timothy Tiny Peanuts, and they just refused to let us know anything about him? Yeah, that shit is kind of how it comes off when you look at Gregor Dessian. But let's just drop the veil a little bit here and see what's actually going on here. What even is the reasoning? There's many different reasons why I could give you, but let's cover one of the most popular ones. Well, for one, outside of the Horus Heresy, the Imperial Fists are not necessarily as popular as you'd expect. It has nothing to do with yellow being a fucking ass color to paint, but it might play a small factor in it, just a smidge, just if you know, you know. Then you have that in some aspects. I can say that the Imperial Fists can be perceived in the right light if you tilt your head and squint just a teensy tiny little bit. Are seen as a bit more of a boring chapter than the Ultramarines in terms of their flavor and taste. The theme of them is sieging as well as being incredibly stoic. Oh gee, a Space Marine chapter that is both good at sieging and being an incredibly stoic group of warriors. I've never heard that in my life. Like, for further context, as weird as it is to point out, Imperial Fist successor chapters are weirdly the opposite. They have the highest rate of having chapter masters dedicated to them that have miniatures as well, like Pedro Cantor, High Marshal Helbrecht, and even if you go to the Horus Heresy itself, you have the precursors who ended up becoming the first chapter masters to the second founding chapters that came up after the Horus Heresy happened. Like, you have Alexis Pollux, the first chapter master of the Crimson Fists. You have Sigismund, praises be upon his name, the first High Marshal of the Black Templars. Fafnir Ran, the first High Executioner of the Executioners. Now that I think about it, I don't even think the Ultramarines have that many characters that became chapter masters. Weird. Though, to be fair, the Crimson Fists and the Black Templars can be written off as not really a coincidence that they're related to the Imperial Fists, as for one, the Crimson Fists are literally the first Space Marine chapter to have ever been shown off, being on the cover of the first edition Warhammer 40k Rogue Trader book, and thus being one of the most well-known and well-recognized chapters before gene lineages and successor chapters were even a thing. And two, the Black Templars are just one of the fan-favoritist chapters in the entire goddamn setting, for a goddamn good reason, and Sigismund is one of the most popular characters. So, with that being said, having good successor representation is important, but why the fuck did the Imperial Fists not have a well-rounded and well-thought-out chapter master? But if I were to put on my tinfoil hat, I think it could probably be because of several different reasons, but the one that's the most conspiratorial is because they're not Ultramarines or Dark Angels, who are currently the most played sub-factions of Space Marines in general across the entirety of the game outside of Black Templars. So supporting what gets you money is usually better as an idea. Secondly, it might be a bit of a long con because I have a feeling that the next Primarch that is going to return is going to be Dorn, and they will likely be having an Imperial Fists range refresh, well, I guess just range addition, because there isn't really much of a range to refresh. I mean, they could just refresh Tor Garadon, getting him even more Primaricified and giving him an even bigger power fist. So once Dorn comes back, Greg can get a model, new lore, and a cute little book to help him acclimatize to the modern day, which is going to be fun as fuck. This is not going to happen. This is just me slowly peeling off my tinfoil hat, but you know. I do think about how weird it is that we don't have models for chapter masters with a lot of very well-known chapters, and this isn't me complaining that, yes, Sword King Acostus of the Emperor Spears doesn't have much lore. No, I mean for things like Salamanders, Iron Hands, White Scars, and of course the Imperial Fists, they're in a weird spot where they do have a named chapter master, and albeit the other ones that I mentioned have more lore than old Greg here, I think it is weird that they don't have models. Their second-in-commands are usually there with models. Like with White Scars, you have Corsaro Khan, who has a model, not on a bike for some reason, which is okay. But I think the more reasonable reason for it outside of that one is that once you make the model, that is the guy now. As much as we shit on GW for being blind idiots and unaware of what people want, I do think that they are going to try to not release models anymore that are only playable for a short period of time. So with very important models like Chapter Masters, they want to get them right and never have to re-release them again, at least until like 10 years from now when they do a range refresh and people bitch again. Because GW, as much as we bitch and moan about them, they know what people don't want. They're not good at figuring out what people want, but when it comes to what we don't want, they learn. And I don't mean that as in they're really good at intuiting it. No, I mean they usually get it wrong first.
see the backlash, and although not so much backpedal, they usually just try to never do it again. So one thing we all fucking hate is them releasing models that they remove from the game relatively shortly afterwards. Like, I know grown-ass men who legit wept because they took away Commissar Yarrick, good old Baelai. So permanent model removals is something that GW seems to be aware is a bad thing. As much as we shit on them, I have a feeling that, like, Primaris Pedro Cantor is going to be coming. Same with all the other characters we lost, like Primaris Lysander and so on and so forth. So the reason they likely haven't made a Primaris Greg yet is because, well, they don't really know if they want to keep him as Chapter Master yet. Maybe they will replace him with a dude who doesn't have the name Greg. There isn't really anything wrong with the name Greg, I should say. It's just, well, okay, Lord Greg isn't really going to strike fear into the hearts of millions upon its mention, you dig? So maybe they do that with other chapter masters where they don't know what they could even do with the model. So if they rush out a chapter master Greg model only to decide when Dorn comes back that they might not want to keep him and they want to axe him for a new, better chapter master who fits the direction of the Imperial Fists, that's kind of where I think that they're going. They don't want to lock in too hard into Greg because they don't know what they're going to do with it, and they want to make sure that if they do a power move with the Imperial Fists, which are a very popular chapter, they want to make sure that it is secure and people like it.
Still a bit sick, but whatever plague I have contracted about a week or two ago is still here, so if I sound a bit out of it, it's because I am. But regardless, when I was in my bed, staring up at the ceiling, wondering why God cursed me with such a feeble constitution, as to be slowly withered away by a simple cold, I kind of thought to myself, you know who's really cool? That one blood angel who got turned into a nugget and didn't let that get him down. Yeah, we're talking about Dominion Zephyr. Well, see, Zephyr is an interesting character for numerous reasons. Least of all is he is one of the first named characters to be made for the Horus Heresy tabletop game with a plastic sculpt in mind. I think there is like maybe 4 total plastic characters that are named, the first 2 being Ahriman and Giger Fellhand from the Betrayal of Kalth box, and with this second wave coming out afterwards during the second edition of the Horus Heresy, you had Fafnir Ran and you had Dominion Zephyr, and that's pretty interesting. And it makes you kind of wonder why they chose specifically Fafnir Ran and Zephyr over someone like Sigismund or Ralderon outside of the fact that they already had a resin model. The answer is literally just likely convenience, and also they were literally just testing the water to see who would buy some random ass named character if they were made out of plastic, and considering they stuck with resin up until this point now, yeah, that kind of gives you an idea as to how well that went. But regardless, you also kind of wonder how interesting this character is. Dominion Zephyr and Fafnir Ran just got lucky, I suppose. They weren't really that interesting of characters. They weren't heavy hitters, if you will. They're not your Sigismunds, but they are pretty interesting characters. They also have the distinction of being the first chapter masters of weirder successor chapters to their progenitor Legion. And we'll get into that later, but Fafnir Ran ended up being the chapter master of the Executioners, and Dominion Zephyr ended up being the successor chapter master of the Charnel Guard, but we'll get into that a little bit later. So this is just me kind of faffing about, but let's kind of put that all aside and ask the basic question that all of these videos are kind of based around, and that is, who the f*** even is Dominion Zephyr? Well, firstly, his name isn't Dominion Zephyr, as I was corrected rather loudly by a friend when I kept calling him that during our Horus Heresy game and referring to him by the first name Dominion, but his name is actually just Zephyr, and his rank is Dominion. See, Blood Angels always have to be especially extra with their naming conventions, so essentially a Dominion is their equivalent to a Centurion, which is the Horus Heresy's equivalent to a captain. He was in charge of about 100 men, which is cool, but what is not cool is that he is always just one step away from being a berserking, blood-drinking savage. Yeah, the Red Thirst kind of had him by the balls since his indoctrination into the Blood Angels, which is why, to get his bloody urges out, he engaged in two different activities. For one, he was known for being an incredibly talented musician and artist, able to play various different instruments, but mostly well known for the harp and piano, if memory serves me correctly. Which, if you aren't familiar, pursuing the arts actually helps calm the raging demons that are in the brains of all the Blood Angels. And the other thing that he pursued in order to quell the demons that are in his heart is just willingly volunteering to be a member of the Destroyer Corps, which, if you didn't know, destroyers are particularly violent space marines who often couldn't be controlled and thus were deployed using the most vile and volatile forms of warfare. That usually led to their death, and if they didn't, well, congratulations, you're considered one of the scariest people in the Legion. So yeah, he just kind of worked it out of his system, either through therapy or through complete catharsis. So the destroyers are kind of noteworthy as they were known for using some of the more unsavory weapons. So unstable Volkite Serpentas, radiation missile launchers, melee weapons that had especially war crimey appearances to them, and the like. This rank was divided into further distinctions, two specifically for each legion, and some had more specific qualifications. I know that in the Raven Guard there was a variation on destroyers, because they technically started it, and these were called the Moritats, or the Shadow Killers if you were from the Legion itself. But we're not talking about them, we're just talking about destroyers in general. The two versions, or rather the two distinctions that were in most legions, were just regular destroyers, who were equipped for long-range assaults with jump packs and close-ranged weaponry, as well as suspensor webs that allowed them to fire heavy weapons while on the run. This allowed them to get in close, use their closer-ranged weapons, and do so with a degree of efficiency that you wouldn't be able to expect with normal ground troops. Now, speaking of, the other category is Zone Mortalis destroyers, which were destroyers more specialized for close-quarters combat where jump packs couldn't actually be used. Think crowded hallways and city streets. Zephin was the former of those two categories, and enjoying good old melee and twin pistols as the main idea of how to fuck up a person's day. And apparently he was so good at it that they promoted him to captain, which, having an ex-destroyer as a captain is something you'd probably only ever see as a Blood Angel or a World Eater, just saying. But yeah, as a Dominion, Zephin was actually pretty well regarded, but he was known for his unshakable depression more so than just that. Something about his personality was a bit more morose, a bit more downtrodden than a traditional Blood Angel. See, Blood Angels tend to be especially emotional, but for Zephin himself, he was known for extreme bouts of melancholy, and this only got worse after the accident. Yeah, this man was basically in his own live leak video of unprotected factory worker versus industrial lathe, and by industrial lathe I mean some undocumented alien species that ripped him into pieces. Legit, I don't fully know why they didn't just turn him into a dreadnought. I guess he was just on that line. It was likely due to a personal request, probably, but he lost both of his arms from the shoulder down, his left leg from the knee down, and his right foot. The man literally couldn't fight back if he wanted to, unless he just really wanted to bite you, but other than that, they had to kind of give him constantly rotating bionics that, for some reason, just would never fully work. Well, they would work, but after a while, his body would always find a way to reject them, causing him immense pain and causing them to seize up and be less than useless. As a man who is pretty depressed at base, this was probably not the best thing for his mentals, but you know, such is 40k. Though, in a weird twist of events, and him serving in a weird cultural exchange war crime group, he ended up meeting with a legendary scientist and documented crazy person by the name of Arcan Land. You know, the guy who discovered the Land Raider and such. Through a bit of collaboration as well as tech heresy, they were able to find a way to get some bionics that were specially advanced to work for the Vamp, and thus he was able to defend Terra during its siege. And thus are the bionics that you are going to see on his model if ever you were to pick it up, which gives him such a unique silhouette as a heavily augmented marine that is not actually from the Iron Hands, which is a very rare thing to see these days. He was known for being a bit of a brute in melee combat, after the accident that is, because he did lose his fine motor skills for the most part, due to him losing those limbs and the constant rejection, and this meant that he couldn't produce music and art the way he wanted to pretty much ever again, which kind of lends itself to the meme of him holding up his bloody arm stumps and proclaiming, I guess I'll never be able to play the piano again, but for real this time. So as the story goes, he found new purpose and a renewed vigor in his totally not AI-powered bionics that helped him carve through traitors like a banshee determined to do nothing but kill bald men. It's actually openly stated that he lost himself to the rage of the Red Thirst during his defense of Terra, and even though this is usually a death sentence in the heat of combat, he actually managed to survive, and even didn't fall to the Black Rage upon the death of Sanguinius, which is weird. This led to him being the first chapter master of one of the Blood Angel's successor chapters, who always seems kind of fake whenever I look them up. Like, every time I see pictures of the Charnel Guard, they always look like someone's hokey fan chapter. You know, they just use the shiny Charizard colors of black and red, and they have like the coolest equipment and the coolest gear, and their chapter badge is overly designed for some reason. I don't know. I always just felt that way, but I'm getting lost in the weeds here. There is some canon conflict, I will admit, that is kind of confusing me, though it's also probably because I just didn't look ahead enough in the Horus Heresy, and maybe I just have incomplete records, but if you know better than me, make sure to correct me in the comments. But as it's stated, he is the first chapter master of the Charnel Guard out of the Horus Heresy, which would imply that he's a second founding chapter master, which is a big thing of prestige. But if you look at all of the successor chapter information we have on the Charnel Guard, it says that they might be third founding, and it's not even 100% confirmed that they're a part of the Blood Angels, which makes very little sense considering, no, Dominion Zephyr, he is very much a member of the Blood Angels, and is confirmed to be their chapter master, so I think they just didn't update it as they probably should, or maybe the information is just kind of skewed across, and maybe it's a different Charnel Guard I'm thinking about, who knows? Though, looking at the Charnel Guard, they are known for being incredibly morose, melancholic, and having nothing but Horus Heresy relic weapons and tanks at their disposal, which would make sense considering he is a veteran of the Horus Heresy who has a fondness for technology. But I don't know, man. I just think Dominion Zephyr is a very interesting character. He's actually incredibly cool, and one of my closet picks for like top 10 favorite Horus Heresy designs as well as characters. I don't know as much as I would like to about the man. A lot of my research came from just peering through the old Armory books at the Charnel Guard's history, as well as reading over some accounts that a few friends of mine referenced for just chapters of books that he was in later. But I genuinely think that he is such an interesting character that he deserves more of a spotlight. A lot of people tend to look over him, and also his model is just really cool. With the Iron Hands, I had a handful, mind the pun, of characters I wanted to cover, but much like with most things in life, it's all about timing. So I didn't really want to cover the Chapter Master just yet, so what am I going to do? Easy. Let's cover a different Chapter Master. But what if I told you there was a man so angry, bitter, petty, and racist that when you read about him, you somehow loop back around from being unnerved at the level of violence on display, and instead loop to just being excited at the idea of seeing what new and horrible hate crimes this man can come up with. With that being said, Autekmor, leader of the Morrigal clan, and probably one of the people that Ferris Manus would look at and go, okay, that's a bit too much. Yeah, Autekmor is such a weird character because he feels like he's made for a different legion that doesn't exist. Though, don't get me wrong, he is a part of a legion that fits him with the whole cold detached acts of hyperviolence thing. But with Autek, there is something almost transcendent about how mean this dude is, and I'm here to let you guys know about it. Firstly, who is Autekmor? Well, he's one of those guys with an ill-defined title that basically covers what is essentially just a Praetor, or maybe a Praetor plus. The easiest way to put it is that in the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy days, there was this rank known as Centurion. Centurion is the equivalent of a Space Marine captain, taking charge of 100 Marines. A Praetor is in charge of 1,000 Marines, so think of it like a chapter master. And then you have weirder ranks above that, commanders and so on, but it's very legion to legion. So with him, he's kind of like Iron Father, Iron Lord, so on. I don't want to pretend like I know how the Iron Hands structure their legion. But regardless, he was the leader of a clan. Now, clans are the equivalent of companies in the Iron Hands, but the thing that kind of makes them weird is they are so varied in size that there isn't really much of a standardized size. Each of these clans kind of has their own functionality to them, and each of them has their own real way of going about it, and they're all based off of the different clans that could be found on Medusa, the planet that Ferris was from. And it's kind of there to help establish stronger familial ties inside of the companies rather than just having them just be guys working in an army. But yeah, Autekmor was in charge of the Morrigal clan, which comically enough was the we don't talk about them clan of the Iron Hands, which was weirdly common as a concept throughout the Great Crusade. Almost all of the legions had a company of dedicated members that were basically just we're gonna put them to the side because we don't like looking at them. The Raven Guard had the Shadow Killers, the Emperor's Children probably had a company called the Uggos or something for the less aesthetically perfect looking individuals. But regardless, Clan Morrigal was founded upon Autek Mor being an actual asshole. That's literally the ground principle. Honor duels and literally friendly fire was kind of the big thing here. Him taking out an outlaw clan on Medusa in order to gain his own clan was kind of the founding action, and because of that, he kind of named it after himself just a little bit, so then Clan Morrigal came into being. And they all had basically the same steaming attitude that he did, constantly brimming with a level of anger so much that there was a heat shimmer on them. It's actually highly considered by his other brothers that he might not actually have the gene seed of Ferrus Manus because he just lacks so many of the key characteristics of the gene seed, which would be kind of interesting because he came from one of the first batches of Marines to come from Terra to go into the Iron Hands, which by implication would mean that maybe he's one of the lost sons of a different legion that might have gotten exiled, like the 2nd or the 11th Legion, but we're not going to talk about that. Regardless, he is very good at what he does, and is now the leader of his own clan, named Morrigal. This Terran-born Marine had a very particular set of skills, and what were they? Win at any cost, while also pissing off the other guy as much as humanly possible. Where some clans fought through mass bombardments and trench warfare, some fought through ground troop assaults, the Morrigal clan won wars by acting like a living typhoon. They would attack in whatever way they could that would overwhelm you, deploying every single guy they had all at once in the shock assaults that were so dangerous and so overwhelming that there really wasn't much you could do, and they wouldn't stop until you were either dead or they were dead. They would only ever relent in victory, or if they themselves were dead. But if they ever had to retreat by orders from on high, or some other random reason, like the planet was falling apart and there really wasn't a reason to fight, you can be sure that within the next 10 years, even if you got away scot-free and ended up setting up shop in some random planet in the middle of nowhere, far away from your past life, that you were going to get a knock on the door from some very large armored man with the symbol of Autek Mor, a red talon, obviously, on his armor, just to grab you and drag you away by the collar to turn you into a servitor. Yeah, he was a vengeful and horribly irritable man. It's kind of his thing if you didn't catch on to it by now. This man, if he had the power, he would make a Job out of anybody who so much as breathed on him the wrong way. And no, I'm not getting into theology here. If you just want to know what I mean by using Job as a verb, just Google it. But yeah, he was kind of kept at the back of most engagements due to Ferrus Manus kind of being embarrassed of him. And it was also because of his devastating lack of chill, almost being a bit demoralizing to his own guys, because they were like, Jesus Christmas. But this kind of, weirdly enough, led to him being in a slightly better position than most during the Istvan Dropsite Massacre, as he wasn't in the middle of the nukes that were being dropped. It kind of is a bit wild to think that of all people, this man, known for being a blood-rot psycho, who made it so that his skin could feel the touch sensations that his armor could, just some weird augment that he got, was actually a loyalist to the core. I think it's more that he was just upset at the temerity of someone thinking that they could get away with betraying him than his ideals closely aligned with that of the Emperor, but, you know, it still counts. Regardless, him and a lot of his company survived the massacre, which is a good thing and a bad thing. Like, for one, it's a good thing because his clan would live long enough through the massacre to be a pain in the ass to any traitor that ever existed, so we'll cover that in just a second. But it's also a bad thing because, well, the clan he had fostered was filled with people like him, violent maniacs who wanted to kill things as quickly and violently as possible. Which, due to the majority of the Iron Hands being destroyed due to the massacre, which meant that they were one of the only mostly intact clans. Thus, the image of the Iron Hands and their mentality would be changed forever due to the high intake of Clan Morrigal. But I should note that during the Dropsite Massacre, Autek Mor had one of the most based moments I've ever seen for a character in 40k. He was basically advised to flee the drop site as quickly as possible to regroup and then, you know, leave. And instead of doing the reasonable thing and leaving the planet, Autek Mor, with many people telling him he should not stay and that it was dumb if he did, decided to stay and fight. Why? Because them. I love this man so much, but yeah, he ended up risking his life and his legion's life for the sake of a petty getback. But you know what? It kind of worked out, as he got out of that hellhole and ended up banding together some Iron Hands to go bomb worlds occupied by traitor forces at some point, glassing them entirely. And when I say at some point, I mean these were planets that were just brought into compliance by other factions that were now traitor. In his eyes, there is no such thing as innocence, only degrees of guilt. So in his efforts of bombing worlds populated with mostly nice people who wished to work for the Emperor, he was given numerous awards. I swear, this man was being paid to come up with new war crimes, which is kind of fun. But eventually, the heresy ended, and with his help, it was actually a bit easier on the side of the Loyalists, because he ended up doing some pretty decent work outside of the jokes of him bombing loyal worlds. But yeah, he ended up doing a great job that did help. So to show him his dues, he was nominated the chapter master of one of the first successors of the Iron Hands, the Red Talons, named after his clan symbol. And as you could probably guess, they were all literally batshit insane. With a particularly huge hate boner for traitors, the Red Talons are also a very classic chapter of Marines that have been kicking around since the 90s and 80s, since their original inception, and now they're still around in the era Indomitus. Though Autek Mor is obviously dead, likely died throwing out a bunch of new pejorative terms he came up with on spot to describe the mothers of whoever had the audacity to think that they could deal with such a horrible, horrible man. I like this guy, if you couldn't tell. I think Autek Mor is a very 40k style character. He would be a lot more at home in the Black Templars, I mind you, than he would be in the Iron Hands, but I think he fits because, I don't know. It's just the deeply passionate persona that sometimes would eke its way through of Ferrus Manus would kind of fits. I don't know.
Oh, hi. Hello. Midway break to do a bit of a weird promotion thing, but I did a face reveal recently. If you didn't see, I was an official guest at the Las Vegas Open and had a lovely Q&A panel there. Everyone was so polite and everybody was also very, very kind. You should go check out the live stream as it's still up on the Frontline Gaming page. Go support them and show some love as they treated me very well. Also, I hope you're enjoying this video as it's been a blast from the past just to get through it. Seeing how my mic, my editing techniques, and my style has developed over the course of a year is pretty cool if I do say so myself. I think it's really fun. But anyways, let's get back to it.
With the 2nd and 11th parts of each of these videos, I make it no secret I use them as kind of a means to just cover random shit that doesn't really fit in any other category. I don't really get any excuses to do this, so so it's stuff that wouldn't really fit with the other legions, or I just tend to cover random bullshit. Though, I suppose considering for the Night Lord section of this series, I just wanted to cover bugs. I guess I just don't really follow my own rules, or any rules to be honest. Though, you guys are just along for the ride at this point, I suppose. Anyway, it's been a while since I talked about the Grey Knights, so let's get to that, shall we? I have such a mixed set of emotions when it comes to the Grey Knights. I used to not like them at all, because their lore has always been a bit one note, and that note is I am the bestest of everything. But now I'm kind of in a position where they're not nearly as bad as they once were. In terms of writing, I never really find them all that interesting, but I have been going through the codexes recently, and they're better. Codex writing and codex fluff versus actual book fluff has always been a bit of a debate as to which is better, and sometimes it's better in one than it is in the other. And with the Grey Knights, I find the writings in their codexes are significantly more compelling, as it's a lot more glazing, I guess. I don't know. I decided to cover one of their more recent re-released dudes, and the dude that I wanted to cover was also pretty damn fun in one of the codex entries that I was reading. So this leads me to the one, the only, the buddy cop film we never anticipated, Garen Crow. Though, weirdly enough, most people here wouldn't know him by that name. They mostly know him as Castellan Crow, due to that being the name of the miniature on the tabletop. But considering me and him are on a first-name basis, I think I should just call him Garen for the most part. So, what is there to know about him? As we find out with these kinds of characters, quite a lot. But first, we need to cover a few specific bases. So, Garen is the one in charge of a small subsection of extra special Grey Knights known as the Purifiers. The Purifiers are kind of weird in that in a faction of 9 corruptible space marines, the Purifiers are kind of in a league of their own. See, a Grey Knight is still often able to see the temptation and just resist it when it comes to chaos. A Grey Knight has the resilience to resist all corruption, but for a Purifier, it's as if the temptation doesn't even process to them. There is no corruption for them, as corruption cannot find a single notch in their armor to get in. It's hard to explain, but if you get it, you get it. Needless to say, the Purifiers are pretty rare. You have to be a very specific kind of Grey Knight to get promoted to their ranks, which leads them to only having about 40 to 60 dudes at any given time. And you can always mark them out on the battlefield as they have pure white helmets to show who they are. The purpose is that they are in charge of looking deep into chaos-infested locations to accomplish specific goals and find specific chaos artifacts that are kind of a detriment to the majority of Imperial society. They send literal death squads of small amounts of Marines to demon worlds just to collect a sword and then leave. But the thing that kind of puts them ahead of most other Marines is that they are resistant to chaos corruption that would corrupt even the most staunch of Black Templars. Their leader is particularly special, as he is in charge of holding what is widely considered one of the most dangerous chaos relics, if not the most dangerous chaos relic, in the entirety of the Imperium's possession, the Blade of Antwer. Now, this sword is interesting, as even Grey Knights in the past have been not so much corrupted by it, but sapped of strength. And although not so much fallen to it, it has reduced them to nothing more than a husk. It is a weapon of such immense power that we truly don't know what it's capable of, or really what its origins are. It seems to be kind of a Be'lakor style thing, where we don't truly understand the level of threat that this thing occupies, as it's either linked to all 4 chaos gods or none of them. It's actually theorized in universe that it is likely or possibly made up of a forgotten chaos god that no longer truly has sway on the mortal realm. Think like Dracnian, the sword that Abaddon carries. Now, the Blade of Antwer passes down through various Castellan champions, as to simply seal the blade away in like a stasis field is too dangerous, as it has a habit of disappearing when not directly observed. It also can call on mortals to come steal it, which is not ideal, but regardless, this is when some freak named Garen got the sword passed down to him from his prior master, who had ended up getting murdered. And that is where we shall start our discussion of this man. Castellan champion Garen Crow and his incredibly annoying sword. When I said Crow was a bit of a freak, I meant it. Even by Grey Knight standards, his brothers are kind of unnerved by him. See, like the Purifiers, he is incredibly resistant to chaos, but even by Purifier standards, he's kind of actually better described as being immune to chaos. It's like, in other words, he's kind of his own blank. But he's not. He's also still just a psyker. But it's weird, as he genuinely has no concept of chaos corruption in him. There is no virtue to his personality that can be exploited by chaos, to the point where he keeps the Blade of Antwer on him at all times. He is able to actively listen to the blade, write down everything it says, and then pass it off to someone smarter than him for transcription into something usable. Because yes, he keeps a diary of everything the blade says to him, so that if there is anything useful, others can actually use it to smite chaos. But that's the distinction. Anything the sword says, he literally just ignores it. He doesn't actually pay heed to anything and doesn't even recognize the words as having any meaning. There has been records in the past of him fighting demons that the blade absolutely despises. Like, good example, Skulltaker. You know, that guy, the corn guy. Skulltaker, I love that guy. And the sword was actively giving him forbidden knowledge on how to kill Skulltaker, to which Garen just ignored him. Or it. We don't know, really. Because the second he starts to follow the advice of the Blade of Antwer, even if it is helpful, helpful, that is when Garen Crow will likely see his downfall. See, he just uses the blade as a really sharp power sword, to be completely fair. But let's not get confused here. The Blade of Antwer, this isn't just a sword. It is so evil and so powerful that other Grey Knights cannot stand within a certain range of Garen before they start to feel sapped or like something is trying to possess them, which has led to a lot of Grey Knights being a bit unnerved by how easily Crow can wield this sword. And it also leads to Castell and Crow being left alone for long periods of time. This man's burden is to lead the Purifiers while also keeping the Blade of Antwer from falling into the hands of Chaos, which is not exactly one of the lightest burdens in the entirety of the 40k setting. Easier said than done is kind of the easiest way to put that, but the dude is pretty damn top level in terms of most of his skills outside of that. Even by Grey Knight standards, he's still one of the best psychers that they have, likely in the top 5 of the chapter. He also uses the Blade of Antwer in such a way that it is legit intimidating to see. Even if it was just a power sword, he still fights like no other man could. This sword has a god housed in it, by the way, so it also gives him that kind of power boost, I think. I don't know if he allows it. It's weird. Okay, this is kind of much ado about nothing, but I just kind of want to use this as a moment to bitch about 10th edition really quickly. Okay, so Blade of Antwer. Housing an entity currently so powerful that the Grey Knights actually have no classification for what it could be, because it's stronger than a demon prince and stronger than a greater demon by leagues so noticeable that it's genuinely terrifying to think of the implications. But for some reason, if the Emperor's Children leaks are true, which as of this writing, the Emperor's Children shit is not out, but if the leaks are true, the emptied out Lair Blade is just a straight upgrade on everything the Blade of Antwer has. Aside from the Blade of Antwer having dev wounds, obviously, which makes no sense lore fluff-wise, at base, they should both just be considered special and incredibly powerful power swords, but for some reason, the Lair Blade is literally just a really good sword, but the Lair Blade is literally just a really good sword that has a little bit of demon residue on it from a greater demon that used to live in there, yet for some reason, it's strength 8, while the Blade of Antwer, which currently holds an entity so powerful, I'd compare to something like Dracnian, or even Malice, to some other Chaos gods, and it's only strength 6. 10th edition fucking sucks. It has no sauce, stacks no paper, gets no bitches, etc, etc. But me bitching aside, I do like the idea that Castell and Crow is constantly bickering with this eons-old demon god, because apparently the sword itself has phases that he has to deal with. Depending on how long the current master has held this sword, the phases are like what it's willing to do in order to be freed or take control of its owner. So phase 1 is usually threats. If you don't let me free, I'll kill you, eat your soul, kill your friends, basic shit. But after about a decade of that, it usually switches up its game and tries to seduce them with power, which is usually the more dangerous phase it can be in, as that's the thing you can go, yeah, well, I'll just ignore it. And that's usually the more dangerous phase, because, well, you and me above game could be like, yeah, well, I'll just ignore it and not get corrupted. But here's the part that you kind of have to think about and kind of factor in, and that's that Garen Crow is on active assignment, meaning he will be fighting greater demons and monsters the size of Humvees. His brothers have multiple times died next to him, and he was incredibly close to dying on several occasions himself, which is when the sword promises the most, to heal his wounds, to give him strength, to allow him to hold the sword for longer to keep it safe from, obviously, the other forces of chaos. It's obviously going to just be a one-time use, right? So why not just give in? It would save everyone else, so why not? You could just put it back the way it was. And that's how the pointy gets you, which is why I think Garen is probably the most interesting of the Grey Knights. But I may just be tweaking, and also I still have to kind of look up Kaldor Drago, but whatever. Part 12 is World Eaters, and weirdly enough, there is a lot of good selections to discuss here. I do have a lot of plans to cover a lot of individual World Eater duders in the future, but there is quite a lot of them. There are a lot of cool stuff involved with the World Eaters in general, and most of the characters involved with the World Eaters in general are at minimum just kind of interesting. It's hard not to be when your moods range from mad to even bigger mad. So what's there to do? Do we cover Chainsword Hammer Smash Man, the biggest biggest bungus who ever roamed the brass-covered skull plains. I could bamboozle you all and cover someone who is a corn-worshipping lunatic from either Warhammer Fantasy or the AOS series, because, well, I still read those books, even though none of you seem to care. But nah, I think I got something weird and a bit special. It's kind of odd because I looked around and I think maybe 3 people have talked about this guy. I like to cross-reference a lot of my research to see if I missed anything. So, it's weird that not a lot of videos have kind of covered this individual, but let's talk about the first butcher surgeon to have ever existed. The man who perfected the butcher's nails and made them work for Space Marines. The one, the only, Galen Surlock. Which, on a side note, if you've ever specifically read or listened to the audiobooks for the Horus Heresy, you'll learn one thing, especially if you're as dyslexic as me, which is the people who read them and narrate them have very attractive voices, but also tend to pronounce things in ways that make them hard to understand. I was trying to find a man by the name of Garland Sulak, but that's apparently not his name. So, this isn't like your Karns or your Angrons. Surlock was a 12th Legion apothecary who was probably one of the most deeply entrenched traitor fellas to have ever lived the traitor lifestyle. Like, before the World Eaters were even considered traitors, Galen Surlock was already pretty much best bros with Fabius Bile, red flag, and was swapping secrets about how to make stronger Marines on the side. Also, red flag. So let's break down this kind of obscure footnote in the history of the World Eaters and see if you nerds learn anything. So with Galen Surlock, there is a lot of significance to his name, but what you need to know about him is pretty streamlined. He was one of the most important apothecaries in the World Eaters, and eventually became the master of the Inductii for the Legion, which is basically the fast-tracked Space Marines that don't get as much training and more heavily indoctrinated in order to get them into the Legion as fast as possible, which is really bad when you go back to my Fabius Bile comment. Since Angron refused to accept his children unless they were affixed with the Butcher's nails, he tasked Surlock with the creation of a stable variant of the Butcher's nails. See, making the Butcher's nails is kind of harder than you'd expect, especially for this purpose. With Angron, he doesn't even have the regular nails in his brain, since the original nails were meant for humans and sometimes abhumans like Ogrins. The nails were basically this strip of cabled nails that were hammered into a person's brain at key locations. How I kind of interpret it is that they kind of provide short circuit locations that deaden certain parts of your brain. They act as kind of like a bypass node, where say you're thinking a happy thought, the electricity will flow through your brain to the spot where happiness is generated, and instead of going there, it'll go to the nail that is embedded in that location, go up into the machine, and then flow directly into either a pain response or directly into the part of your brain that causes anger. I also assume this process, even if it doesn't go to the pain response, is incredibly painful. Think like bypass surgery for your heart, where they make an additional pathway for your blood to flow out of your heart, but instead of blood, it's happy thoughts going to the rage part of your brain. So regardless, when they were used to make non-compliant gladiators fight, it did work like a charm, albeit their lifespans were drastically shortened. But then comes Angron, who doesn't exactly have a normal human brain. So they probably just crudely kept strapping on more and more nails and hammering them into his skull, until pretty much every section of his brain caused him pain to think with, no matter how mundane, and except for, the angry parts, which, if you couldn't tell by his prize-winning smile and pleasant demeanor, Angron is not exactly the nicest sword in the universe. So with Angron's more butchered version of the nails, pun, but with that as the only thing to study creating a prototype that was going to work on Space Marines, not even humans, it was kind of a difficult process, because going back to Nuceria was likely not an option for reasons probably associated with Angron's steadily worsening mental illness. But regardless, Apothecary Surlock kept making prototypes and implanting them in Marines to mixed results. I say mixed results, but the end results pretty much every single time up until the point where he got a success was death. But the mixed part comes from how bad the deaths actually were. They ranged from just them having a critical brain aneurysm and dying on the table, all the way up to them thinking implanting a librarian with these nails was a good idea, and him inevitably exploding in a hellfire storm that makes the medical bay that he was kept in kind of look like it was raptured. It was failure after failure. Even after speaking with Fabius Bile, while, but it came to a head when the 12th Legion was sent out to repacify the planet of Genna. Genna is weird. Genna was allegedly a part of the Imperium, but all the nobles and dignitaries that were sent there kind of went missing. Upon arrival, the World Eaters met with weird homunculus people who all went by the same name, which I genuinely cannot remember. I had it written down in a small post-it note. I lost it. But they ended up talking about peace and love, and they wanted to work with the World Eaters to find this peaceful in-between. And it was pretty evident after days of negotiation that this was absolutely going nowhere and they were just being stalled. And it also became very likely that these people were probably not human. Especially when, in a moment of frustration, one of the Marines cut one of them open and, they were kind of filled with semi-biomechanical whoozawhatsits. Also, they were yellow on the inside, like they bled yellow. The Genins then started to amass for war, but the war itself was kind of weird because essentially billions of these weird simulacra people showed up, all looking the same, and started to overwhelm the World Eaters. Not because they were good in combat or just because they had weapons. No, the Genins were actually unarmored, wearing nothing but robes, and had no weapons. They literally just through sheer numbers crowded around each of the World Eaters and kept tugging and pulling on cables and soft seals until either a helmet would come off, the armor would come off, or something vital would get exposed. And then they would either suffocate the Marine by jamming their hands down their throat until they couldn't breathe anymore, breaking whatever pieces of them they could until they couldn't move anymore. And if that didn't work, they just kind of pulled them apart like a zombie horde, because it doesn't matter how hard your skin is, eventually you're going to get picked apart if there's enough ants ripping at you. It was discovered later that the Genins were being controlled by a weird semi-psychic impulse control device, whatever, that was worn by the true Genins, humans who, due to old night, were disease-ridden and lived their lives in these weird pods, controlling these Gestalt simulacra in peace on their planet. Apparently, thousands of each of these biofreaks were controlled by one true Genin a person. So with that information, Galen Serlak was pretty interested and had a nasty idea. Essentially, by examining the archaeotech that was being used, he realized that they were kind of very, very similar to the Butcher's Nails, and more of a modernized version of it that could actually be, reverse engineered. So seeing how they would plug into the Genin's brains, he decided to reverse engineer it and then mix it with the technology of the Butcher's Nails. After collecting one of these control devices, he had possibly discovered a breakthrough that would make one of the most stable, stable is kind of a relative term here, but please follow me, the most stable variant of the Butcher's Nails to date. He had a prototype ready after studying it for weeks and months and was going to begin implantation on the first test subject relatively soon. Needless to say, this was a controversial move in the Legion, and it led to a lot of opposition from those who thought the Butcher's Nails were kind of a bad idea. And it led to one of the more gruesome scenes in the earlier sections of the Horus Heresy, or at least the parts that led up to it, where one of the tech marines from the World Eaters decided to show up and sabotage the inventions that Serlak had made. And, he showed up, and Serlak kind of knew that he was going to show up, and had a feeling that other people would try to sabotage his workings because he wasn't stupid. He knew that this was going to cause a lot of boat rocking, essentially. So, he shot him in the neck with a pistol loaded with a poison that he got from his researcher pal, Fabius Bile. This pistol was a needle pistol that was definitely not standard for Imperial equipment, probably stolen from Xenos and possibly also mixed with chaos magic. But this poison caused the Tech Marine to freeze up, and because Garland Serlak is kind of a prick, he decided to torture this man to death with his apothecary drills. Just, it's a research opportunity, might as well, right? He's also a traitor. Why should I listen to the complaints and cries of traitors? But yeah, with that business out of the way and Galen having a shower because he was covered in a lot of goo, he decided to roll out the Butcher's Nails. And who do you think was the first person to get implanted? Karn, of course, a man who is known for being the coldest in temperament and most disciplined, because making that into a rage monster was a great idea. Karn was brought into a recessed pit in the ground, and the nails were literally hammered into his brain with like a ball peen hammer. And from there, kind of history, really, because the entire Legion was pretty much damned from that outset. Though Psychers were kind of banned from using them for obvious reasons. You don't want more fiery raptures to explode on the ship itself. Kind of dangerous, Regardless, I don't think there's much else to know about Surlak. That's kind of his most important thing. He was the reason why that the Butcher's nails were able to be implanted in Space Marines, which is kind of a big deal considering that's the main thing to know about the World Eaters. The nails smooth away whatever thought a person would have. Every piece of their personality is slowly grinded down like a stone against the tide. It doesn't matter how long you have them in, at some point you are going to basically be nothing more than a rage monster. Now they do give you the benefit of likely causing your adrenal glands to crank up to the maximum volume at all times, making you at least 100 times stronger than you naturally would be. Think like a Deathstroke from DC Comics. But, it's at the cost of your mind and spirit. And we have to blame the creativity of one mad scientist for being the one to crack the case of how to make them. Weird how not many people actually talk about him. I know he's not exactly the most popular character and doesn't really have a model, but I don't know. Part 13 was only ever going to be one person. See, in this series, we cover a bunch of weird Space Marines or bugs who have an interesting lore behind them, but not enough to make an entirely massive long video. I don't need much incentive outside of I think they're cool in order to justify talking about them and concepts around them, but today's character was one of the reasons why I wanted to even do this for this next series. Because it is essentially this character being so one of a kind that no one really even knows if he's canon. Not because of some weird legal dispute like Malal, or because he was created so long ago that people don't really know if he's a thing or not anymore, because he did come out within the last 5 years. The reason why this man's canonness is debated is strictly because if he is canon, then we have ourselves a new super weapon in the 41st millennia. Spoken of in hushed whispers and fearful tones, this man is a living monster who fights for the Imperium. His arrival heralds prayer dedicated to him and his quest. His name is Malum Cato. May his sword never dull, his bolts always fly true, and may we never need him again. Okay, jokes aside, Malum Cato is a Stern Guard veteran that, due to people wanting to make a hype-fucking game that was similar to Doom with the controls of early Quake, this man has accomplished feats that gods would weep at the sight of. He has killed thousands of Marines, literal chapters worth of Chaos Space Marines. Not just lackeys, but don't get it twisted, he has also killed a bunch of lackeys. He has killed a Terminators, champions, aspiring champions, chaos sorcerers. And let's not even get into the actual death toll of the greater demons he's fought. And yes, I mean greater demons. Like in the game itself, you end up fighting several greater demons, mostly just great unclean ones and lords of change, but he fought them, and I'd say it was a one-on-one, but it wasn't actually a one-on-one because there were also hundreds of smaller dudes hitting you with shit from the corner of your vision that you couldn't really hit. Yeah, I'm bad at these kinds of games. If you watched my live stream of those, yeah, sorry about that. But he killed a Lord of Change, chaos sorcerers, thousands upon thousands of cultists. He carries an entire armory on his back filled with a healthy mix of archaeo tech, bolt guns, and heavier weapons like a heavy bolt gun, my beloved. Malum Cato's exploits in the game Bolt Gun are hilariously overproportioned, and I just wanted to make an entire video to talk about him as well as just Stern Guard veterans in general. So let's dive in and talk about both, as there really isn't much to say about him because he doesn't really talk much and there's not much lore other than me pointing at something he did being like, ain't that sick? But yeah, to give some extra context, Malum Cato is a Stern Guard veteran, basically a First Company veteran Space Marine who specifically is tasked as the ultimate gap filler. He is meant to stay behind lines and make sure that if there is any breaks in the lines that he can fill it in and make sure that it is not weakened so much so that enemies can break through. See, a bunch of troops for a specific battlefront end up getting killed, you send in a single squad of Stern Guard to reinforce them. These specialists are known for being incredibly stoic, calm in the face of overwhelming odds, and
dare I say, stern? Yeah, these are the ranged veterans who carry a bunch of varying ammo types for their bolters that allow them to dispatch most, if not any target. I am talking Kraken rounds, Vengeance rounds, basically a pouch filled with a new and unique war crime with every shot. These individuals are usually allowed a lot of leeway in order to get whatever job they need done. So this leads us to the main plot of Bolt Gun, which I won't bore you with the entirety of it. I think I did make a video about Bolt Gun once upon a time, but to kind of retouch on it, Graia, the planet that Space Marine 1 takes place on, and Bolt Gun takes place about a little while afterwards, has been kind of overrun with chaos corruption because of a certain relic that was causing a rip in it, so demons, chaos sorcerers, and the like start to kind of take over it and try and do their own thing. Said chaos sorcerer wants to reclaim that warp artifact, rip a hole in the warp to the realm of chaos, and then let chaos bleed into this universe. The artifact is probably able to do that, but you know, it's a little trite, but you know, it's a Doom clone. You can't really expect any complicated storytelling here. So the Inquisition requests aid from the Ultramarines, and they dispatch a single squad of Stern Guard veterans. The drop pod they were in crashes, and the only survivor is none other than Malum Blueberry Balls Kato. What follows is not suitable for children, as using his bare hands, teeth, and whatever weapon he can find, he rips and tears through a literal army of cultists, legionaries, demons, and damn near everything else you could think of. This man is a one-man wrecking crew, and it literally makes no sense. Either possessed by the Emperor, or maybe he secretly has a bad case of protagonist syndrome. Malum Kato racks up a kill count of the most ludicrous things you could possibly imagine. Now, you might be saying, Mr. Bones, it's a boom shoots. It's gonna have some gaps in logic in order to make sense and still be a fun play experience, but you gotta basically assume that it's not canon, and the game devs just wanted to have you fist fighting an amble for funsies. And I say go f yourself, because this shit is funnier if it's canon. Nah, I like the idea of having him just doing that. In my head, he's just like that. He's actually just that competent. He is canon, and you can't convince me otherwise, because to suggest he isn't canon is lame as My idea can literally be summed up as he was just the guy in the place doing the thing, and that's just what he does. That's it. Nothing more, nothing less. It's like how Titus is a bit immune to warp taint for some reason. Maybe Malum Kato is kind of like that, which is why he didn't immediately melt upon the sight of a great unclean one. Hell, maybe it's like how in all Resident Evil games, the actual canon way of playing through 99% of those games is the no damage run, because no one ever actually got bitten except for Outbreak, but Outbreak is weird. I think that is what it is like for Malum Kato, moving so fast and not actually getting hit and just being the luckiest man on planet Earth. God, I love the idea of this dude just being the Doomslayer for the 40k setting. I know that Kaldor Drago is basically the Doomslayer, but he sucks and I hate him, so suck my ass. But let's get a little bit more meta with this and just discuss why Malum Kato works and what we can learn from it. Well, he works because of two simple reasons. Bolt Gun is fun and Malum Kato is simple. Character-wise, he isn't a brooding nerd who has superpowers and is contemplating the darkness of his soul. No, he's just an archetypal space marine who's also pretty loud and brash, which leads to people being pretty endeared to him when he calls some tiny nerdling a heretic. He is a fun little dude. But what we can learn is you can get away with a lot of bullshit if the game is fun. Like the reason why we treat other offshoots of the 40k setting and the canonness of them differently is because they might not be as fun or universally acclaimed as Bolt Gun. Like Blood Shooters and Teeth is, no one really talks about the canonness of like 4 to 5 orcs just decimating entire titans, because that's kind of bananas. But regardless, I think it's one of the reasons why. It's just fun. Bolt Gun is a very fun game, and because of that, Malum Kato has been kind of endeared to people. I think GW making games that are fun and not worrying about the canon is such a good callback to how they used to be prior to like maybe the 90s or the 80s. I think that it's one of the funnest experiences to just see the bright colors and not worry about taking it too seriously. The second something either becomes too powerful or is not powerful enough, modern day GW has a tendency to remove it from the game and from its canon, and slowly try to whittle down any mentions of it in the future, which is why I really wish more games like Bolt Gun would come out. Good example, if you don't mind me going on a bit of an aside, is I ended up picking up BattleTech recently. Yeah, it's weird. I know this is going somewhere. I don't know how to play the game fully yet because this game is Byzantine with its rules, but I like the idea that I went online and was actually overwhelmed by the amount of mechs that I could choose that looked like just tinker-tonk bullshits from the middle of the 90s to the 80s to maybe even the 70s. Like, the old Commando mech is so endearing to me, and the fact that it's still able to be played, still has rules, and even if it's shitty in comparison to other mechs, like, I'm glad that you can. I've been told several times not to pick up specific mechs because a Phoenix Hawk is just better, but they're still an option, even if they are just objectively worse. The idea of something being in there just because it's fun to have it, I think is a good idea, and I think it's fun. But GW doesn't really do that. But yeah, it's kind of why I adore Boltgun. You play as a firstborn veteran on a mission to skull as many dudes as humanly possible, and it doesn't need to be more complicated than that. Chaos. Y'all love chaos, right? And do you like Space Marines? Ooh, jingle the keys, jingle the keys. For real though, I kinda wanted to make a point here and post this as a members only video to get a few of you riled up in private. Vent out my dogshit takes with glee in the security of knowing that probably my most sycophantic of followers are only going to be the ones that are watching. Goodness me, I do love echo chambers. But in the spirit of smashing my action figures together, let's actually make a big claim here. 40K has this category of Chaos Marine that I have always really liked. It's one of the reasons why I pick up Chaos Marines, and it is the God-Sworn Marine. They are the specifically sworn-in Marines that have thrown themselves into the lot of a specific god 100%, and basically are just permanently stuck on that path. There's technically only 4, but it gets a little more specific the more you look into it. But you have the Khorne Berserkers, the Noise Marines, the Plague Marines, and the Rubric Marines. So I'm gonna cover them in order of what I think is weakest to strongest, give a little summary along the way, and then make a few enemies. Alright, cool, let's hop into what I think is the weakest with the Noise Marines. And they are kind of the weakest in my honest opinion. Now, my resources are the early Cacophony Marines of the Horus Heresy, but also some of the more intermittent lore from the early 2000s, so their power scale may have been shifted a bit. I should also note that just because they are the weakest of the Godsworn, I genuinely think that calling them weak in general is a misnomer. They are still far and above stronger than your standard tactical Marine or even your standard Marine in general. With that being said, I gots to say, unimpressed. Obsessed with creating the most nerve-shredding, sensory, overwhelming music, the Noise Marine is a weapon fitting of Slaanesh. They are usually just stimulation-addicted Marines who undergo surgeries to make sure they feel absolutely everything at the height of their body's capabilities to feel things. With this, they have sonic blasters of varying sizes. These weapons were modeled after Bekwa Kinska, a lady who created the first song of Slaanesh for the human race and summoned demons into real space, performing for the Emperor's children back before the Horus Heresy. She was inspired by Slaanesh, and it really shows. The instruments she created for this performance were retrofitted into the first sonic blasters that the Cacophony or the Sonic Marines or the Noise Marines use today. While not lacking in physical combat ability, the Sonic Blaster first and foremost is an instrument, not technically a weapon. So to be fair, I have seen quite a bit of lore of someone just tanking the Sonic Blaster, not coming out unscathed, I mind you, like losing bits of themselves as well as possibly almost dying every time it happens, but I have seen it happen. And although still a Marine and still an Emperor's children, when you get up close to them in melee, they do tend to fall apart a little quicker than what you'd expect for something like this. Okay, so the next one, third place, we'll get into a little bit of a caveat here, and I think that the next 3 are a lot closer in position than the Noise Marines are to them. But with that being said, Khorne Berserkers are kind of a one-trick pony that time and again have been shown to be dealt with by Space Marines and Space Marine Sergeants. Does that make them weak? I don't know. Why don't you go ask them yourself?
Regardless, there was a war once upon a time between World Eaters post-corruption and Emperor's Children post-corruption, and it led to one hell of a brawl, but the Emperor's Children ended up getting fisted by the Berserker charges, which is always fun to see. Khorne Berserkers want to do nothing more than to run into you, screaming like a maniac, and then splattering you into the dirt. They are an incredibly violent and unpredictable force that must stop the ticking of the nails in their brains through the application of proper violence at all costs. So they fight with a level of savagery that most people can't really match. When I said earlier that Space Marines and Sergeants have taken down Khorne Berserkers, it's usually when they fight en masse, like 4 Marines to 1 Berserker, or 1 really skilled with plot armor Marine. Regardless, a Berserker falls into the same pitfalls as all Berserkers, and you can just blow their head off at a distance if you get the drop on them just a little bit. They have no real response to it, to be honest. And that being said, of all the specialist dudes, I think winning in a straight up melee against them is probably the hardest. Okay, let's head up to second place. So who is the silver medal? Oh, fudge. What will it be? It's the Rubric Marines. Yeah, Rubric Marines are the second strongest. Don't hate me because I'm beautiful, but in general, the Rubric Marines are pretty hard to kill. Using arcane magics to shield themselves, they don't really have vitals for you to nick. So you can poke holes in them, it's just not really gonna do anything. Their weapons damn you to hell if they so much as scratch you, and if we upgrade to the Aspiring Sorcerer, which is the person that leads the Rubric Marine unit, then you have a little bit less of a competition against these specific Marines in terms of why they have the second place over the other 2 that were behind them. And that's because alongside having pretty decent melee, pretty good shooting with Hellfire bolt guns and Hellflamers, you then also have them being a really accomplished Thousand Sun Psyker who can control a unit of 10 guys. The Rubric Marines do have one major weakness which is tied to that and is the reason why they're in the second place, and that is if you kill the Aspiring Sorcerer who is leading them, although they don't go limp per se, they do become less capable without the guidance of a proper Psyker presence in their midst. So obviously that leads to the number 1 most dangerous and most powerful of all 4 of the Godsworn Marines being the Plague Marine. And I don't know about you, but it wasn't even close in my mind. I know I said that they're pretty close, but genuinely I think that the Plague Marines are just absolutely bonkers on the power scale. They are the most resilient, as unlike with the Rubric Marines who have no vitals, the Plague Marines have so many vitals that it doesn't really matter what you hit. And also, if you nick anything that is important, it'll likely grow back if you give them about 10 minutes of a reprieve while fighting them. Alongside that, they have ranged weapons that would frighten even the most staunch of Thousand Suns. Like, their bolt shells at minimum have a viral payload that will turn you into a soup if you are not a superhuman. Not to mention their basic kit includes poison gas throwers, poison sludge throwers that also eat through gas masks and any hazmat suit you might have, blight grenades, which are cursed to damn you to hell and also turn you into a demon, I guess. Their melee, while not being on the same level as Khorne, is still above the others. I'd say it's above pretty much a lot of Marines, more so than you'd expect, as they have a long list of weapons for their armory, for plague knives, plague swords, bale swords, massive power scythes that have scraped the throne of Nurgle. They have these magical plague weapons, and though they don't have the psychic capabilities of the Rubric Marines, they do have their own benefit that kind of trumps that, and that is the aura of disease. This catch-all cloud of pestilence that if you spend too much time around a Plague Marine, which around a Plague Marine usually means within 2 kilometers, it usually ends with you either turning into a sludge or a zombie that will fight alongside. See, you might be able to win a fight against a Plague Marine and maybe even send them off, but even if you win a fight against them, in hell, even if you kill them, you're probably going to die anyway because of the diseases you caught from them. And that's kind of why I'm a big fan of them. They're basically just one of the most I win regardless of what you do to me kind of Marines in the setting. And I think that I might cover more Death Guard stuff in the future. Also, speaking of, this is like part 14 in a series discussing characters from each of the legions and Order of the Legions. I just got bored researching Ignatius Gruelgore for the Death Guard video and just decided that this would be a funnier video to make, and I kind of want it to be a bit cheeky. I prioritize entertainment and fun over rigid structures, so there is that.
now here is where I kind of have to show my ass really quickly and let you guys know I totally messed up the order of this. I'm an incredibly dyslexic individual and forgot that the Thousand Suns came before the Sons of Force. I have a literal list of the topics I'm going to be covering, and I don't know, my eyes just crossed, I guess. I'm kind of an idiot here, so I guess I'll just play catch up now and cover the Thousand Suns rather than the Suns. You get it. So yeah, for those of you who don't know, this is part 16 in a 20-part series I am doing for channel members, covering interesting characters or unique topics to each legion in order of the legions. Do you need to have seen the other parts to understand this one? No. But it would make me happy. You're paying for it, and I gotta justify this price point somehow, right? Regardless, today, since we are talking about the Thousand Suns, I feel like I should dip my toes into the one and only Amon, one of the most important, yet least talked about characters of the Horus Heresy. See, Amon, I'd say, in terms of importance, is up there with Ahriman, but the problem is he was just not mentioned in the modern setting of 40k, so the writers had to make him die in a way that wouldn't f with the modern canon. But anyhow, who is Amon? Amon, while also being one of the most common names in 40k, was the surrogate father of Magnus the Red when he landed on Prospero. But there is a bit more to him than that. I do want to cover more psychers like him in the future, so I might make a lengthier segment then, but I kind of want to tease it now for you guys. I kind of like Amon a lot more than your standard Thousand Suns member. It has nothing to do with the fact that he has a weirdly striking resemblance to me, though that doesn't hurt, which, like, if I had a nickel for every Space Marine trader who was the right-hand man to the Primarch pre-heresy and even pre-becoming a Space Marine that looked weirdly like me in real life, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice. Overused memes aside, there is both a lot and not much to discuss involving Amon. The main things being he was the first person to take Magnus the Red under his wing and teach him the ways of both practical and philosophical usages for psychers, referring to the warp as the Great Ocean, which I always found kind of cool. I'm kind of that same type of learner where learning esoterically is easier for me. Metaphors are how I understand things a little bit better. Though I will say maybe giving Magnus some more of the practical explanations of things was a bit better, because, you know, as we all know, him speaking in metaphors is what got him in trouble at the Council of Nicaea, but whatever. Amon taught Magnus everything he knew. Even by the standards of a mostly psyker-populated planet, Amon was pretty above the rest, but Magnus, in less than a year, was able to outpace more or less the entire population of the planet. You know, it's just standard Primarch bullshit. Essentially, Magnus felt he could do anything, and honestly, with the ability to disassemble someone on a molecular level just with a thought, yeah, he wasn't too far off, to be completely honest. Regardless, Amon always kind of knew that Magnus was like the capital H him, and it led him to not be too envious because, I mean, you're never going to outrun a car, so that's kind of what his perspective was. He kind of had a feeling that this was going to be one of the greatest psychers in the universe, so he just wanted to be along for the ride. There was a lot of odd calamities that occurred because of Magnus's rise to power, you know, due to a few whoopsies on his part of exploring a little bit outside of his reach and attracting a massive swarm of the psychic mosquito brain parasites, you know, the Psychnuin. They were basically able to find Magnus and the small tribe that he had dwindling in a small cave nearby, which led to quite a lot of them dying, but it also led to Magnus the Red realizing that, to be honest, he could probably take care of all of them, which he did. He ended up killing off the majority of the Psychnuin, which made Prospero kind of easier to live on, which is kind of cool. He basically used his psychic powers to kill every last one of the parasites that he possibly could. And as things go from there, Amon's life was pretty chill. Hell, when Magnus met the Emperor, he was able to get them to sign off on this literal 30-year-old man becoming a Space Marine, which is, although not impossible, see the Space Wolves and their major Jarls for the longest time, but it's very likely that Magnus used some biomancy bullshit to allow this man to become a Space Marine. Weirdly enough, as far as father figures go, Magnus the Red is the only one to have fully converted his dad into a full-blown Space Marine to my knowledge. The rest of his brothers only had half Astartes, like Luther, Corphaeron, and so on and so forth. Regardless, Amon, by Magnus's side, was able to found the Corvidae cult in the Thousand Suns, which is basically the main group of psychers who were able to predict the future and see distant locations, which led Amon to allegedly become a one-man CIA for the Thousand Suns. Sons. I mean, he had a lot of help from other psychers, but he was pretty much well off on his own. Weirdly enough, with Amon, his history is a bit all over the place and hard to track. This usually leads to him just kinda being there. I mean, hell, there's even a small plot arc of there being a fake Amon for a little bit. Or it's Zinchian bullshit, but whatever. Like, in regards to the whole flesh change debacle, he was one of the Thousand Sons who survived, though it wasn't really touched upon too much. Same goes with the burning of Prospero. He was kind of just one of the dudes who was able to knuckle under and survive the onslaught of the wolves. For someone who basically has the same tenure as Luther, he sure isn't really treated like Luther. But this leads into the next main stage event, post-Rubric, post-Heresy, and so on. He ended up taking his warband of Thousand Sons and merging them with Ahriman's warband. They basically cooperated with each other for similar goals, though due to this not being a 100% merge and them being two figureheads, it led to a bit of contempt on the side of Amon. And as you could probably tell, it did not really end well when he tried to kill Ahriman. As I mentioned before, Ahriman is alive in the modern day setting, and you don't really hear about Amon. Thus, you could probably infer that the conflict did not end in his favor, with Amon being a literal pile of ash on the ground, and Ahriman being really sad about the whole situation. As you'd probably expect, he is the mopey type. But in general, after that, Amon and Ahriman's warbands merged together to form the Prodigal Sons. There is, as you would expect, not much to update on him after the fact. You know, with Amon being a pile of ash right now. There is a lot that Amon has done. I know this is a bit more of a basic video, but Amon is not exactly like Barabbas D'Antioch in terms of a traitor character. This character with a lot of personality, if I were to criticize the writing for him for just a second, it might just be from my perspective, but it feels like Amon was created because he had to exist in order to progress the plot. Sure, there was a lot of interesting story bits that were included in his life, but he seemed like his beginning and end points were like the only reason he exists. To give Ahriman some more angst and give Magnus a second dad. I find a lot of 40k characters, especially in the Horus Heresy, tend to fall into that bracket. So, I messed up in the last two videos, as I kind of inferred. I mixed up the parts of when the 15th and the 16th Legion go. I got the numbers kind of intertwined. Please forgive me. And instead of covering a Sons of Horus topic, I just covered what a Black Legion or even a Chaos Space Marine was like. So, to do a little bit of a do-over and give you guys exactly what this series is, I'm going to go over and redo the Sons of Horus. I'm going to give you guys what you want. Not slop, I'm going to give you Peem. Absolute Peem. I'll probably include the weirder parts from this error in the compilation in the future, but I just gotta admit when I was wrong, as uncommon as that is. And if you think I am wrong all the time, brick. Regardless, I'm gonna be doing these Sons of Horus for real this time. I wanted to talk about a character I think is cool. Looks cool, but also just kind of has this aura about him. And even though he has this aura, he's just a bit of a marketing gimmick created to sell a campaign book. Basically, the Siege of Chthoniya book came out, and they've released 2 miniatures to sell alongside it, as well as a new classification of unit. It's complicated. Evander Garius, one of the coolest Terminator captains I've ever seen, and the subject for today, Varen Ashur-Haddon. Varen is really goddamn cool. Well, at least his miniature is. I don't know, something about a man who goes into a fight with 2 asymmetrical weapons always makes the neurons in my brain light up like a Christmas tree. This hunk of man meat wrapped in a hard crab shell is an old as sin Sons of Horus Marine. There are a few things you guys should know about him when it comes to him being a thing, so let's go through it. Starting off with why he's well known. His title, the First Reaver, lending itself well to how GW is pretty bad at naming things, is to let you know that he was the first person to ever come up with the Sons of Horus combat tactic known as the Reaver Squads. See, on Chthoniya there are roaming gangs of tribesmen. These gangers would work in the mines and would fight in a way that is brutal but weirdly efficient. They would actually not outright kill you. They would disable you, maim you, leave you to bleed out, and do it in such a fast and efficient way that it could be considered not a single ounce of wasted effort, just letting nature take its course. They would use jagged, serrated weapons and non-killing weapons that were very brutal to get hit with. As in warfare, it's a little-known fact that most military weapons are meant to not really kill people. They are meant to maim, because if you kill someone, that is
one person out of the fight. If you maim someone, that is at worst one person out of the fight as they bleed out and are left to die, and at best 3 people, because it takes 2 people to carry that person's injured body out of the way, and then thousands of dollars are required to nurse him back to health. So Reavers are a natural extension of that, where they go in with less lethal but still powerful Space Marine weapons. Let's not get it twisted, they're still Space Marines, and they use weapons that would naturally bleed an enemy to death rather than kill them outright. And Varen, as you could tell with him having the title of the first Reaver, was the first, which is cool. He's an old head who believes in the traditional ways and culture of the Sons of Horus as well as Chthoniya, equipped with a kind of low-powered but actually still very dangerous axe gifted to him by Horus Lupercal himself, as well as 2 bolt pistols modified with the Space Marine equivalent of hollow points. Up close, he is incredibly tough to nail down, but even from a distance, he has a weird thing. His armor is known as the Void Panoply, and it's a special suit of power armor that we don't really know how it works. It's kind of implied to just be straight up magic, I guess? Yeah, it's not really explained, but it messes with the sensors of all war gear that could potentially perceive him in real time. It's weird, but in-game it basically just means that he's always 3 inches further away than you actually think he is. So, why did I want to cover him? Because he's literally one of the most back in my day a nickel costed a quarter type assholes I've ever seen in my life in pretty much every work of fiction. Bro literally yearns for the days back when he was doing gang shit with the boys, which is really funny. He's constantly trying his hardest to bring back the ways of the Sons of Horus before chaos. He is 100% traitor though, like don't even think otherwise. He is super loyal to Horus and no one else. He just thinks chaos is kind of cringe. So, when he was asked to go reclaim the homeworld of Chthoniya from the Imperial Fists while everybody else was going off on the Siege of Terra, bro jumped at it. See, the Imperial Fists were tasked with stemming the flow of fresh recruits to the Sons of Horus, as well as trying to remove them from the record. Thus, they took it over for a bit, and by it I mean Chthoniya. So, Varen and his group of like-minded boomers, a conglomerate of Space Marines believing in a non-chaos Horus called the True Sons of Chthoniya, marched up to reclaim their home. Outside of Varen being a staunch traditionalist, there isn't really much to know, as he survived the final fight of the Siege of Chthoniya to live on to another day, and was basically just a toy introduced to sell the Siege of Chthoniya book that was released relatively close after his release, alongside Evander Garius. I think his war gear is cool, and the fact that his pistols are equipped with Space Marine killer bolts is also really cool. But I think the part that, and I definitely should note that this is just speculation, but you'll see what I mean when I get to my end point with this, but I think the coolest part is that he is potentially the first dude to have led the True Sons Chaos Space Marine Horus warband thing, and calling them a Chaos warband is a bit of a misnomer, as they aren't really a Chaos warband, but they kind of are. It's complicated. So, they worship the ideals of Horus. The True Sons is a pretty on-the-nose name, considering Varen had that boomer doomer squad called the True Sons of Chthoniya. But, I mean, it could just be a coincidence. I mean, it's not like GW and the Black Library have a history of taking dudes and haphazardly giving them nicknames that become chapter names later. Isn't that right, Nasir Ahmet, the Flesh Terror? I sure hope that whenever you get a chapter in the Second Founding, it's got an original name. Oh, and what about you, Fafnir Rand, Dorn's Executioner? I sure hope your chapter has a fun and unique, completely original Do Not Steal name. It's totally gonna be new. That recycling nicknames? It's not, nah, that never happens. Never. Me being a smarmy asshole out of the way, the True Sons worship Horus and offer up burning effigies before major battles as a way to show their allegiance. Doing the bare minimum in terms of chaos worship so as they don't invite demon invasions into their lives, because chaos does not take losing well and takes losers even less well, so they were hunted for a bit by, the various different chaos sources out there that were very upset that they weren't led into a new chaos utopia universe because of Horus doing his big old tantrum. But, the True Sons handle it in stride, just a few sacrificed babies thrown into the ritual pyre, and bibbity bam boom, you've got yourself one hell of a ghost baby shield to prevent you from being mauled by bloodletters. Though, perhaps praying to Horus might help too. I don't know if there's some kind of talisman that comes from that, but I'm 99% certain his soul got scattered to the wind, like snow blown away in a blizzard, but what do I know? I got the brain of a beanie baby. But him being the first Chaos Lord-ish to the True Sons Sons would be an interesting plot twist, so it's one of the reasons why I wanted to cover him. I do want to talk about the True Sons a bit more in the future, but I think the dude is really cool on his own. His lore is cool, his skulls are cool, his axe is cool, his rules are cool, and even though he doesn't have a lot of lore, it's still really cool, and there's a lot to like about him. I will state, I do like Evander Garius a bit more, but that's just my Cataphractii Terminator bias kind of setting in there. You ever just start to do research into a character thinking that they were just going to be a bit of a throwaway dude, but it ends up with them being one of the most important characters in a setting and you know nothing about them other than they exist? Yeah, I know that's a bit of a specific criteria, but let it be known that I figured that one out. I'm pretty slow going through the Horus Heresy right now, like glacially slow, but not without my reason. I was kind of going through the various different characters that were in the GW store, and I saw this individual right here, because I kind of just wondered who the this dude is, and this is Zardu Layak. I thought he was one of those, you know, a character miniature made to sell that miniature and not given much lore other than that. You know, like if you saw my last video about Varian Asher Haddon, he's like that. So cute old little old me goes on to do research to find out that he is not only one of the most integral characters in the Horus Heresy, but he's also like one of the least known. Maybe I just missed him on my way through the Horus Heresy. I'm not as far in as you guys would think, but when I was reading the Horus Heresy, I could not tell you that I saw him, but he seems pretty damn important, I will admit. So make sure to drink something caffeinated, eat something spicy, and get ready because I'm gonna do a bit of a brief dive into his lore. I want to do a bit of a short one here and then do a bit of a deeper one later because there's a lot to this guy, and I want to make a video covering all of the Word Bearer's characters in one big video at some point. So that's neither here nor there. Who is Zardu Layak? For one, he is a Terran-born word bearer who was a part of them when they were called the Imperial Heralds. I'm going to give you a sentence right now to describe him, and if you know anything about the Great Crusade, the Heresy, or any of his contingents, you should know that what I'm about to say is a gigantic red flag. He was a particularly zealous word-bearer destroyer back in the day. Yeah, those three things should never be intertwined with each other, but here the f*** we are, I guess. He was the type to find purpose in his cause to the extreme. I believe the term is dichotomous thinking, where you either think in black or white. It is either right or it is wrong. So basically, he dedicated his entire life to one cause at a time, and anything that didn't align with it basically was thrown into the fire alongside it. And it didn't take much for him to do that. Like, say, you yourself decided that maybe religion kind of cringe, but you decided you wanted to keep your old mythology books because Egyptian mythology and gods and goddesses and gods of undefined gender, that shit's cool. Well, I'm sorry, as a destroyer, he will now do as his name implies and ram a rad missile so far up your asshole that he's going to give you stomach cancer. That was rancid, my god. Regardless, a switch in purpose to a bit of a darker one happened when Lorgar entered his life. Suffice to say, it did not end well for most people, as it ended with him following the word of Lorgar a bit too much, getting a bit too into the old faith of Cultus, and being so buddy-buddy with Erebus that he ended up actually out-Erebusing Erebus, which is kind of crazy, but yes, this dude believed in the purpose of the gods of chaos so wholeheartedly that he was willing to betray everything else. Think of it as if Erebus wasn't full of shit. So I should also note that alongside this, he did not believe wholeheartedly in Lorgar, but he was also incredibly charismatic, so he didn't really need to believe in Lorgar. He didn't need to coast off of Lorgar's sense of oration. So to set the scene to understand him in this brief video, imagine, if you will, a man who decided to wipe his original name from the record and take on a new one that literally means the Eater of Wisdom, which is a dope-ass name. He permanently sealed a demon mask to his head with chains and now covers his gray armor with his own scalding hot blood, thus giving him the title of the
Crimson Prophet. This man was so charismatic that even with all that ghoulish attire, he amassed a gigantic chapter all to himself of individuals who believed in his cause, at least how he pitched it. And Lorgar believed in him too, a bit too much, because as I mentioned, Zardu only believes in the cause of chaos, not in the cause of Lorgar. So when he learned of Lorgar's schemes to bind Demon Prince Fulgrim to his will to kill Horus and usurp the crusade to kill the Emperor, take over Terra, and become king of everything forever and wear the fancy golden pants, spoilers, by the way, Zardu snitched like he was about to get life in prison. He tattled on Lorgar to Horus, released the binding on Fulgrim, and basically abandoned his legion to serve alongside Horus, as he thought the gods of chaos would have preferred that, which they technically did. He was a psychic by nature, but it went a bit farther than that. He specialized in channeling and summoning demons and doing a bunch of demonic shit. He actually had intentions to protect the cause of chaos and even become a martyr on this world during the Siege of Terra, but his main goal was to protect one Ezekiel Abaddon from dying, which, because Abaddon has rocks for brains, damn near happened quite a few times. But the moment Zardu saw Abaddon running his tiny little legs to go save Karn from Rogel, "F you, I win Dorn," Zardu Layak kinda shit down his pant legs in both frustration, annoyance, and surprise at the absolute insane amounts of idiocy on display here. Regardless, sacrificing himself by using his psychic abilities to hold Dorn at bay while Abaddon got Karn, I will state, was impressive. Zardu was able to allow Abaddon to do that and held off Dorn for a little while. His honor guard killed pretty easily, and he himself was mortally wounded by Dorn because it's Dorn. He exploded after dying, releasing a bunch of bad energy into the air, which allowed the first demons to set foot on Terra. He's actually considered to be in the same tier of character in terms of importance to the Legion as Argal Tal, and that is kind of cool because I've never heard about him up until my research for this specific video. Hell, one of my favorite demon models in the entire game's history, Korvax's Utterblight, the giant slug monster, was summoned to Terra by him. I know this is only going to be a bit of a brief video, because that's what these videos are. They're a little shorter than my normal channel videos, but I want to cover him in the future, so think of this as a bit of a preview, because I think this guy is just awesome. Also, did I mention he has bodyguards that are basically Galvar back, sort of? Okay, they're called the Blade Slaves, which are basically a pair of ultra-depressed word-bearers who needed a bit of a boost in morale and some guidance after the burning of Monarchia, which kind of hit the entire Legion hard if you didn't know. So they ended up accepting demon magic ritual bullshit into their bodies, so now they are super powerful, mega possessed. Better than regular possessed that we have in 40k, but worse than the Galvar back, and their whole goal was to basically just protect Zardu. This dude is nutty, and finding out about him so late in the game makes me feel like I am a fake fan. And now all of you know about my fake bandedness. Around 8th edition, GW was trying to release enough content so that all fans of every Space Marine chapter, at least the primary ones, were at least a little bit happy, aside from Crimson Fists. Did they succeed? No, Crimson Fists. The Ultramarines got a Primarch, a new Chapter Master, and the Primaris Marines are basically more geared to be the plain aesthetic that they go with anyhow, but they did try at least to release something for the mainstay most popular ones. This led to them releasing a bunch of characters that existed prior, now Primarisified, with one kind of major similarity that I don't truly understand the reasoning behind, but they were all from the third company of each of the chapters that they came from. I might just be turning into my final tinfoil hat wearing form, but it's so weird that Tor Garadon, captain of the Third Company, Corsaro Khan, captain of the Third Brotherhood, Kayvon Shrike, chapter master at the time, former captain of the Third Company, Iron Father Pharaohs from Clan Raukan, aka the Iron Hands Third Company. It's just very weird, but it had led me to the topic of discussion for today, which is the current captain of the Salamanders Third Company, aka Adrax Agatone, who, as far as Salamanders go, is a little bit of an oddball in the chapter. Adrax does have a bit of a history, even if it is written almost exclusively by Nick Kime. It's still pretty cool. I think GW giving non-main
main stage characters and Cave on Strike, a model for the modern era, was really cool, but Adrax is a bit weird. To understand why, I need to give a bit of context. See, the companies of the Salamanders each follow their own unique philosophy, each one encompassing an idea that Vulcan has pushed forward during his time with us. But with the third company, it stated that the company do their best to embody Vulcan in his entirety, meaning his kindness, his fire, his personality, and his warmth. So it would go to say that the individual in charge of the company would be the most compassionate big man in the roster, right? Yeah, kind of. Nah, it's actually stated that Adrax has a mean streak in him a mile wide. He's a fairly cold and almost cruel man with a strong sense of duty and purpose. But why is that? A brief glance at his history reveals he has fought in many wars that would make most Marines balk just a little. The reason why he is a captain is because the first in command, the captain of the original third company that he was a part of, died, his replacement died, and because he was third in command in the line of succession, he was promoted to captain. There's also that one time that he went through something so horrible that it seemed like it was a typo to me, like I genuinely didn't believe it at first, and that was apparently a rogue salamander librarian rounded one of the most misfit gangs of enemies in the history of just, I don't know how to describe this. Thousands of aliens rallied under this individual, a bunch of obliterator virus-infected Marines malevolent, as well as a bunch of other traitor Marines were trying to retrieve the Tome of Fire from Nocturne, which is kind of an important book to the Salamanders if you couldn't guess from the name. So Adrax, as a sergeant and Marine developing through all this, would have had to engage in some of the worst types of cruelty. This led to him developing a kind of mentality similar, weirdly enough, to that of the middle point between the Raven Guard and the Night Lords. It's basically the ends justify the means with kind of a middle ground cap on cruelty. Sure, we can be detached killing machines if we need to be, but we also have to recognize that people are still people. He sees himself as a weapon that needs to be used in order to smite tyranny wherever it may lay, and to make sure that even though he is a weapon, he should not be wielded in hate, in a way that would be considered an abuse of power. But there is that familiar salamander compassion buried deep down in his psyche. See, he does embody Vulcan quite a lot. He is still a very compassionate man. It's just that he is very stern, calculating, and dare I say very curt at most times. It keeps him from being a little bit too apeshit on the battlefield, if I'm being completely fair with him. It's also kind of interesting to mention how well armed he is, because I forgot to mention before, he is a master blacksmith who has almost unlimited access to the forges of the Salamanders. Yeah, he's the master of the arsenal, which has led to him being just over-equipped for most engagements. He has a nickname that is pretty well received, and that is the Hammer of Nocturne because of his massive masterwork, personally made thunderhammer. If you couldn't tell, he likes beating shit to death with his bare hands in close combat because his other weapon is a homemade flamer that he made himself, and that range is not that great. So, shout out, by the way, to that one time Vulcan beat the shit out of Kurz. I feel like that moment spiritually birthed this man. But Adrax represents a concept very underutilized in the Sons of Vulcan, and that is, simply put, that in order to exist as a Marine in the era Indomitus, you need to feel the whole spectrum of human emotion. What do I mean by this? We often typecast the Salamanders as a bunch of huggable, lovable big men who love war criming only the bad guys, but sometimes you need someone who's going to make the tough calls. Adrax is that guy. He has a cruelty in him that is only tempered by the inclusion of the kindness Vulcan taught his sons over 10,000 years ago. I really like this guy in concept, but I think I'm also biased as he was released alongside a bunch of other dudes in the lore that I really like. I hope GW does more shit like this. You know, releasing a bunch of random Marines from random companies in each chapter. Though, on the lowest of keys, as I mentioned, I really just like this guy because Tor Garadon was released alongside him, and that man is one of my favorite miniatures in the game. GW also seems to be slanting towards just total range refreshes now, which I think is better in the long run, but it does take a lot more time to build up to that. And they're also only doing it for the most popular chapters of Marines they have, which is so unfortunate, but yeah. Salamanders are incredibly popular, but they don't sell as much as the Boys in Blue or the Space Wolves or so on. To the point where when you introduce new people to the
game, they referred to the Blue Space Marines as just Space Marines, thinking that that's the name of the faction and the Blues guys are the mainstay guys. I think captains like Adrax are fun. They are cute when you add them to the game. And again, I'm not just saying that because Torgaradon was added there, but it does help. Fun fact, I wanted to save chapter masters of each of the legions for their own distinct series at some point, once I've read enough about each and every single one of them. So I didn't initially plan to do Kayvon Shrike, but due to him stepping down as chapter master, the embargo is up and now it's time for me to talk about the Shadow the Hedgehog of Space Marine chapter masters. A kid, sort of. I actually like Kayvon Shrike, as his story is pretty fun. So let's do a bit of an overview. Much like most people who ended up being high-ranking Space Marines, this guy was a child at some point, who was being scouted by a chaplain of the eventual chapter he would be a part of. But little Kayvon was a gang runner child from Kievar, so life was pretty tough, as you could expect. Usually they want life to be pretty tough for their potential aspirants, just so that they can have a bit of resiliency to them. He was forced from a young age to do stuff that most men on more comfortable worlds wouldn't dream of, mostly thievery and murder. I'll save you the tedious bits, but basically he got spotted by a Raven Guard chaplain during a rather impressive stint of him demonstrating particularly high resiliency as well as capability to commit murder quite silently, resulting in the deaths of several gang members from rival gangs in his area. He went days without sleep while evading the repercussions of his actions, and it led to when the chaplain appeared finally to take him to the Ravenspire. He thought that this individual, who was, 9 feet tall, was actually a member of a rival gang, so he started flailing, screaming, and tried to attack so that he could escape. But to be completely honest, if there was one chapter that I'd say is the hardest to hide and run from, if it has its sights on you, it'd probably be the Raven Guard. I mean, the Dark Angels are probably more persistent, but the Raven Guard are gonna be a lot better at hide and seek than you. So yeah, he was taken to the Ravenspire on Deliverance, their fortress moon world thing, and he was taught the ways of the Raven Guard. To his credit, he tried to escape a lot, but once the training stuck, he realized that his ideas of stealth, espionage, and freedom are kind of perfectly aligned with that of the Raven Guard. He took to it like a fish to water, exemplifying to the best of his abilities the ideas of Corvus Corax. Stealth, espionage, and death to tyrants, obviously. He swiftly rose through the ranks to become a shadow captain of the Raven Guard, being incredibly renowned for his abilities at guerrilla warfare. Bro rose to be the captain of the 3rd Company, which, as a side note, is kind of weird. Not the captain of the 3rd Company thing. I mentioned this in the Adrax video I released last time for you guys, but there was this weird obsession with GW releasing Primaris members to the 3rd Company of each major legion at the start of the 8th edition, just to kind of give them new characters. This led me to do research into a lot of the people who were associated with that, Adrax being one of them, and Kayvon, being the chapter master of the Raven Guard, is also a captain of the 3rd Company. It was weird, but I don't know, maybe just a coincidence. He eventually joined, and if I remember correctly, he recently did step down as chapter master and joined, I believe, the 1st Company, but regardless, I'm getting off track here. He was appointed captain after the prior captain got so severely injured he was put into a dreadnought, and from there he reaped a toll of whatever enemies he could get his hands on, though shout out to the fact that in his history he has a standing hatred of the Tau. Like, it's on sight if ever he sees them. It's an especially potent hatred if he ever sees Commander Shadowsun, as she and him have a bit of a stealth boy rivalry. Another piece of lore I kind of adore about Kayvon is that his chapter and him have this incredibly brotherly bond with another one of the 1st Legion chapters. And of all chapters, it's the goddamn White Scars. I remember reading them described as fighting like yin and yang once upon a time. One stealthy and quiet hit and run, while the other loud and crashing in on a motorcycle while throat singing. I love this dynamic, as it's kind of what I wanted
that one time the Raptors teamed up with the Black Templars, but where their styles clashed and they couldn't harmonize, the White Scars and the Raven Guard worked together almost perfectly, with specifically Corsaro Khan showing a great deal of reverence and respect to the Raven Guard in his never-ending hunt for the enemies of mankind. But yeah, Kayvon Strike has been the Shadow Master of his chapter for countless years, and it's no doubt why. Being well known as a strategic genius, but also leading from the front like any other self-respecting Space Marine chapter master should. Apparently his lightning claws, at least the original ones he had for his firstborn model, were actually like created by Corvus Corax himself, which honestly is a level of prestige not many people can claim in the modern day outside of a few chapter masters. But yeah, as we approach the end of his tenure, I have to mention that it's stated that he has always been on the hunt for someone to succeed him as chapter master, which is a lot more pragmatic of an approach to life than that of a lot of other chapter masters out there. He's very much someone who knows that as an individual who leads the charge more often than not, he has a finite shelf life. So he's going to need someone to take over for him at some point, which in recent times has happened. Athon Shan, which I don't know if that's how you pronounce that, but he's basically the new chapter master and also someone who has actually been brought up in the lore a few times in the past. I believe in the chapters due, he was brought up a few times, which is part of the Uriel Ventress series. As far as captains go, Athon Shan is a brilliant mind and someone who exemplifies the teachings of Corvus Corax, just as much, if not more, than that of Shrike ever did. So he's been appointed as the newest chapter master of the Raven Guard. Kayvon isn't dead, I mind you, he's just probably tired. Being a chapter master is tough business, so it makes sense that he is constantly fighting an uphill battle. So now, being relegated as a captain once more, Kayvon Shrike is in a spot where he can do what he does best: lead smaller groups of individuals in large-scale campaigns to assassinate the Tau. And what more is there to life than that, really? Hope you all enjoyed this short video on Kayvon Strike. I love his model, his stupid hair, and his pretty edgy lore. I gotta admit though, that new Athon Shan model, it's definitely better as a chapter master. I'll be real with you all. I really wanted this part to just be me covering Alfarius and that's it, and just make a joke about like, oh, I've never talked about him before, or maybe even just upload my Alfarius video from the main section of my channel and just be done with it, pretend it's a psyop and all that, right? But nah, you guys paid for it, and though I am rushing to get this done before I head off to LVO, I will try my best to not squander your guys' support. So we are gonna do something I think is kind of fun. We aren't covering a Space Marine, we are covering probably one of my favorite characters so far in the entirety of the story of the Horus Heresy, which, as a reminder, I'm not that far into it. I tend to just pick and choose books that I want to read out of order and then go back to where I am in the numbered order and go from there. But yeah, we are covering one of my favorite little jokers in the entirety of the 40k human roster and the Horus Heresy roster. A man who has balls so large that even a Space Marine was kinda off-put by him. We are covering Hurtado Bronzi, aka Hetman Bronzi, aka Hurt, the Hetman of the Geno 2-5 Chiliad Jokers Brigade. I know I threw out a bunch of special words that probably mean nothing to you, so let me learn you something here. The Geno 2-5 Chiliad is a part of an illustrious group of military branches known as the Old 100. See, when the Emperor conquered all of Terra during the Unification Wars and imposed a New World Order, there was a bunch of individual pieces of the army that did not 100% vibe with his direction. So a lot of the armies that weren't too keen with his idea of New World Order were disbanded and dispersed and made basically ineffective. But there was about 100 different armies who were actually okay with it and were allowed to stay active and in service as long as they swore loyalty to the Imperium of Mankind. These were referred to as the Old 100, and they were considered some of the most loyal members of the Imperium, serving in campaigns with both Space Marines and Lucifer Blacks, to name a few of the more interesting allies they've had. The Geno 2-5 Chiliad is kind of an interesting representation of the Old 100, because each of these armies, because they stemmed from the Unification Wars, are just kind of weird.
weird. But we are focusing on these guys, so let's just get into them. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. The Geno 2-5 are in army populated by eugenics babies mostly. Through selective breeding sciences, they are able to make their frontline soldiers be bigger, stronger, more imposing, and oftentimes quite a bit smarter. But it goes a bit further than that. It's actually, like I said, very weird. So their command structure is based around this weird rank that kind of stands above everybody, but it's also like outside of the standard military hierarchy system that is in place for this army. Think of it like a commissar in a way, but these are the Uxors and the Uxor Primus, which basically is the word for wife in Latin. Uxors are like 14-year-old girls who are genetically predisposed to have a type of very minor psychic ability. To become an Uxor, you need to undergo a type of procedure that removes your ovaries for storage in order to be used later to create more Uxors and more gene-crafted soldiers. This process activates these weird innate psychic abilities, and for some reason allows the Uxors to be considered the top of the military hierarchy in the Geno 2-5, forming these small psychic choirs, and united by an Uxor Primus, they are able to communicate very slightly with the regiments and convey information faster than standard radio traffic because they would be doing it with a psychic ability that is collectively referred to as the Sept. And it is actually an incredibly efficient and stable way of using minor psychic gifts. They are able to see the future a little and predict enemy emplacements. There is only one major downside, and it's that whatever part of their brain is responsible for this actually burns out by the mid-20s of most women's life and usually is 100% gone by 30. It's why you have to recruit so young. The Uxor Primus is usually in their 20s and is someone who is a bit more experienced and a bit older of the Uxors and runs a small coven of them, and though their powers are starting to wane a little bit, that's why they have their little group of teenagers that are able to supplement their abilities and be directed by them. The Uxors speak directly to what is basically a company commander by the name of a hetman. The hetmen are in charge of a brigade of individuals, each of them having a cute little name to indicate who they are, and this is where we meet our protagonist finally, Hetman Hatardo Bronzi, a man who, outside of the Uxors, is the highest rank you can achieve in the Geno 2-5. He commands a brigade by the name of the Jokers, called as such because this man, Bronzi, this man right here, oh, he's an asshole. He is such an asshole that he very rarely takes any combat scenario, no matter how intense, seriously. But the thing is, he also is indeed one of the best, having served the Geno 2-5 for decades. He's actually kind of a living legend in the army. The thing that makes the Joker so well regarded and considered one of the best divisions there is because they're able to make decisions without the help of an Uxor or the command of Bronzi that would make accomplishing goals so much easier. They are genuinely one of the smartest divisions there, and Bronzi is one of the best leaders. They are some of the best warriors in the Geno 2-5 as well as just the entirety of the Imperial Army. Just like their hetman Bronzi, they are also all sardonic assholes who love making jokes about damn near everything. Bronzi is such an interesting character because he is a veteran, but he's also a bit of a scholar. He's a tactical genius, but he hides it behind the fact that he's just some kind of silly Billy. This is what led him to being one of the cooler double agents for the Alpha Legion. I'm not kidding. Because of how smart he is, he ended up ghosting some Alpha Legionnaire and figuring out that they were on the planet doing something that they weren't being 100% honest about to the Imperial forces. This led this individual to sneaking up behind him and giving him a warning. Back off, or things get bad. Bronzi was literally pissing while they did that, and to his credit, he was nervous, but was like, I might as well go out with a laugh if I'm going to. Started clowning the guy a little, but it did end with him disappearing later on in the novel. Disappearing to do what, you may ask? Receive the greatest CIA anti-torture techniques a human being could have. Even getting an Alpha Legion logo tattoo on him for branding purposes, obviously. He was actually instrumental in the Alpha Legion getting the drop on the Cabal, who were trying to get a hold of their Primarch, which is really funny because I feel like the scorecard at this point for the Cabal is like 2 to 300
14. God, they lose a lot. But yeah, the Cabal is just a collective of aliens. I should cover them at some point. They're really not that important. Bronzy was actually captured by a Lucifer Black Squad around this time and was subjected to some pretty heinous torture, but due to his training with the Alpha Legion, I don't think he was actually able to even crack if he wanted to. He just kept saying his name and rank to them until he was recovered. Bro is literally unbreakable at this point, and I love him for that. I love this character in general, to be honest. I like non-Astartes characters that in some ways outclass Astartes. Mortals who do cool shit is much more impressive to me than non-mortals, especially if he's an asshole about it. So I could not think of a cooler guy to end this series on.
That was all 20 parts-ish from behind the paywall. I hope you all enjoyed it, and were surprised by a few changes and a few surprises that happened. Like, for those of you who don't know, the Dominion Zephyr video was actually a remake of the original video. No particular reason why, it's just that I hired a new editor to work on the videos at that point, and she wanted to redo it just so that she could show how much she'd improved for this specific compilation video. But yeah, let me know who your favorite character is in the comments, as well as just who your favorite character in general and what you want to see next. I genuinely have a lot of fun talking about the weird little Griblies. But yeah, thank you all for watching, and special thanks to my channel members for supporting me. It is genuinely astounding how amazing the support you guys have basically just completely overhauled my life. I could not be happier than I am now, and I'm able to engage in side projects, which, if my memory serves me correctly, you will be aware of one of the major ones by the end of today. I'm able to go to LVO, meet some cool people, and make a whole boatload of new friends, as well as meet a lot of you. I wouldn't be able to say that if it wasn't for you fellas, so I can't say this enough from the bottom of my heart. I appreciate you all. Thank you all for your time, your support, and just, well, loving this hobby we all enjoy so much. Thank you once again for watching. Until next time, I hope you all have a wonderful night.